Howdy doodle farmers, it's podcast 45. Numbers divisible by 5 are cool. And 45, I don't know, I think it's one of the more cool looking ones. Sadly, the 45th President of the United States tainted the integrity of that number a bit. But he's on his way out, you betcha. Doesn't matter what they tell you, he's gone. Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker. I tried something new for this episode. Instead of working on the podcast bit by bit throughout the week in hopes of releasing it on Tuesday night, which historically hasn't worked, I decided to start working on it on Monday morning, see if laser focusing on the task for just 2 days would work. As it turns out, no. And the podcast remains, instead of weekly, not a whole lot better than monthly so far. I really thought I had a shot this time. No Droon segment, so no reading, nor flipping through the book taking pictures. Those are always hard, but watching movies and taking a lot of notes on them is also pretty hard. I've been attempting other new things for the channel, like, really long ago I tried to make Let's Plays on my PS4, and just a couple weeks back we tried to do a reaction video, but copy protection. We can't beat it. And I can't figure out how everyone else does it. There are probably thousands of Let's Players and reactors out there, but nothing I do can beat copy protection. My gameplay and the movies we watch simply don't show up in the recording, and I just don't get it! Everybody else does it. Okay, let's get started. With no Droon segment today, I'm gonna make it a real big Keys and Kingdoms segment. All three 1994 films on my list, and then concluding this page of the recap. We're starting with The Return of Jafar, a rather dubious first for the Disney company. From 1994 to 2008, Disney had their small Florida studio, Disney Toon Studios, on the task of churning out cheaply made direct-to-video sequels to the classic films of the animated canon. These thingies are rather infamous for their nature as cynical cash grabs, but I think most Disney fans will agree they're a heck of a lot better than Disney's new approach to milking their successes, the mega-budget live-action remakes of their classic films. I can't imagine how the fuck anyone can enjoy those. They're awful. I hope Mulan 2020 fucking tanked, and Disney jumped ship on the... I'm sorry, I should save that rage for much later in this collection. Now, I've been quoted as saying, specifically in the margins of a Kingdom Hearts fanfic I wrote, that I actually have a fondness for the sequels. In particular, expressing an opinion that the entire Aladdin trilogy works great as a single work, and that The Lion King 2 is just as good as the first. I'm prepared to eat those words. I haven't seen any of these films since I was in my early to mid-teens, maybe. My nostalgia goggles may be on. I've seen a few clips of The Return of Jafar more recently, and the art and animation are definitely about as inferior to the original Aladdin as it is possible to be. It's pretty cheap. I guess on par with what you'll find in the Aladdin TV series, since the two Aladdin sequels effectively served as a pilot and finale to the Aladdin series. I will say about these Disney Toon sequels that their art definitely got a hell of a lot better over time. Generally, the ones made after 2000 or so are much better looking than the Saturday morning cartoon-looking ones from the 90s. They also did a pretty good job with casting, usually collecting a very decent portion of the original film's voice actors, replacing those they couldn't get with very high-quality talent, and getting really good actors for the new characters. But, yeah, voice acting is the only thing you can ever say was of the caliber of the original films. But, voice acting's good. Good acting can really clear up a film that doesn't look very good. Not as much as good writing, but still pretty well. So why am I doing this? Why am I subjecting myself to The Return of Jafar and all that follows? Well, I've basically always regarded these sequels as being canon. They add elements to their universe which I think would be criminal to leave out of Keys and Kingdoms. So I'm tackling them all. Except for the ones that are just poorly packaged collections of TV episodes. Yes, Hercules, Zero to Hero, and Tarzan and Jane are nothing more than very flimsy stories to serve as a framing device for 3 episodes apiece of the Hercules and Tarzan TV shows. Indeed, I'm pretty sure Zero to Hero is just the Hercules episode Hercules in the Yearbook, but with the entire episodes inserted as the flashbacks instead of merely being a clip show. Cinderella 2 and Belle's Magical World, meanwhile, are similar framing devices for episodes of the Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast TV series. Naturally, there were no Cinderella or Beauty and the Beast TV series, because how in the heck do you carry entire series with these premises? You can't, so they took the work that had been done, packaged them into those pieces of shit. Now, Atlantis Milo's Return is also 3 episodes of an Atlantis TV series that never got made, but I will be watching that film in my collection because an Atlantis TV series actually would have had some good lore in it, so I do intend to look over the 3 episodes we got. Anyway, let's get started on The Return of Jafar. Released on home video in 1994, a mere 2 years after the real Aladdin, it kicked off this sequel trend, which, once again, lasted until 2008. It was John Lasseter who put the kibosh on it, I believe. When he was put in charge of Disney's entire animation department, he definitely worked hard to bring some integrity back to the studio. He gave the movie that would become Bolt a huge overhaul, for the best, I'm sure. He made his sadly failed attempt at bringing back mainstream traditional animation. And, well, somewhat ironically, he had the Florida studio switch from traditional animation to CGI. 2008 saw the release of the final Disney Toon Sheepquel, and also the release of what they proceeded to work on after that, the Tinkerbell franchise, consisting of 6 films and 1 TV special, and the 2 Planes films set in Lasseter's own Cars universe. All of which are in my collection for some reason. Pixie lore, I suppose, and, Cars universe lore, even though the Cars universe makes so little sense that a huge portion of the audience are completely incapable of enjoying the characters and stories because the universe baffles them too much. Anyway, the last Tinkerbell film came out in 2015, and I don't know what happened to Disney Toon Studios after that. Let's look it up. Okay, so the Florida studio, it started in 1990. They made the DuckTales movie. Their biggest release, outside the cheapquels, would have been a Goofy movie, as well as a few theatrical Winnie the Pooh cartoons. And though their last feature was indeed the last Tinkerbell film in 2015, the studio officially shut down in 2018. Not sure what they were doing in the intervening 3 years. It appears that after John Lasseter never came back from his little sexual harassment sabbatical, they closed down the Florida studio, as basically everything they were working on were his projects, leaving the 3rd Planes film eternally unfinished. I'm not stalling or anything, I just want to make sure we have an appropriate amount of history before we dive into this black hole of sequelitis. So, okay, The Return of Jafar. Interesting, this film begins with the new content warning about negative cultural stereotypes. When Disney Plus first came out, a lot of older films like Dumbo with its black crows and Peter Pan with its quote-unquote Indians had such a warning on their plot description. And I saw some news recently about how they're making that warning a lot more prominent. Apparently that means having it up on screen for 12 seconds before you can even start the film. But on Return of Jafar? I've always heard that Middle Eastern people are very fond of Disney's interpretation of Aladdin. Like, the TV show was a big hit in that part of the world, but I guess they're, just being safe. There are a lot of unattractive Middle Eastern villains in the Aladdin franchise, so, We open on some new lyrics to Arabian Nights. That's interesting. And strangely enough, different singer. I knew Bruce Adler returned for the 3rd film, so I guess I just assumed there was no Arabian Nights reprise here in the middle one, but here we are. We open on some thieves on horseback heading to their secret hideout with a bunch of stolen loot. A band of thieves led by one Abismal, played by Jason Alexander. Now, I think the only new character introduced in this film, a recurring antagonist in the TV series. Aladdin and Abu swoop in to liberate the stolen treasure, resulting in a fight scene. And okay, the animation, not as bad as I feared. This is a good action scene. Looks better than the Little Mermaid series. It's nowhere near theatrical feature quality, but it's quite good. And Carpet is also involved here, looking much less ornate than he does in the film. Because it took some pretty expensive 1992 CGI to print a design that ornate and awesome on a hand-drawn character. Meanwhile, Iago has escaped from Jafar's genie lamp and worked hard to drag himself and the lamp out of the desert sands where it was buried. From inside the lamp, Jafar demands to be released, but Iago, finding Jafar at his mercy, begins to think he doesn't need to be Jafar's lackey anymore. Jafar's retort that when the two met, Iago was in a cage in the bazaar saying stock parrot phrases is a line I like very much that's been on my mind ever since I conceived of Keys and Kingdoms. It implies that Iago used to be a normal parrot until Jafar used his magic to uplift him to human-level intelligence. See what I tell you, these crappy sequels have lore. And again, the animation is a lot better than I was expecting. It's much less sloppy than on the Little Mermaid TV show or even Gargoyles. Iago decides to drop Jafar's lamp down a well and go into business for himself. In song. Yes, Iago has 2 musical numbers in this film, and a lot of people are displeased by this. I don't know, I've just never understood people complaining about having to listen to Gilbert Gottfried. I feel like if the guy's voice was genuinely unpleasant, he wouldn't be the beloved comedian and voice actor he's been for decades. He's very entertaining. As for this film in particular, his only project in which he's had a prominent singing role, he had a singing double for Don Bluth's Thumbelina, he's a little flat at times, but he can carry the tune. It's a gift to be able to sing in a character voice like that. Remember, Gilbert Gottfried's voice is not his natural voice, though considering he hasn't broken character in a good 30 years, I suppose at this point it might as well be. Aladdin starts dropping the treasure he reclaimed randomly in the streets of Agrabah. Yeah, you're supposed to bring stolen goods back to the people it was stolen from. Yeah, but we don't know who the thieves stole it from originally, so maybe Aladdin is in the right by randomly distributing it amongst Agrabah's commoners, though just dropping it from the sky, you're gonna start street brawls that way, dude. Maybe give it more discreetly to Agrabah's poorest. Aladdin, who incidentally still dresses in his street rat attire throughout the sequels and TV show and stuff, and is merely engaged to Jasmine throughout the franchise. Also, they don't get married until the end of King of Thieves, despite what the ending of the first film looked like. He flies up to Jasmine's balcony and presents her with a bejeweled flower that Abis Mal had wanted to claim for himself. So the duo get to be very handsy and flirty with each other throughout the series and have some genuine relationship development. There's a little moment where Abu tries to snatch the jeweled flower back from Jasmine, but Raja stops him. And, Raja's tiger noises are a lot more Frank Welker-ish here than I remember them being in the first movie. Maybe Raja didn't have a human voice actor at all originally. This film's musical score incorporates all sorts of leitmotifs from the original movie's songs. It's quite a nice touch. When Iago sees Aladdin walking by, he quickly makes himself look weak, injured, and dirty, and crawls up to him, hoping to get some sympathy out of him. It fails, and Aladdin tries to capture him, only to run into Abis Mal again. This is interesting. Aladdin is dressed as Prince Ali in this scene, in preparation for a dinner with the Sultan, and while Abis Mal doesn't recognize him, his lackeys do. I guess not everybody in Agrabah is face blind, just most of them. Aladdin has to fight off the thieves using only his wits in the environment. Abis Mal keeps telling his guys to hurt Aladdin. You really had to go there? Real Disney films have no trouble at all using the word kill, and when you talk about hurting people in a cartoon, you clearly mean it as an incredibly childish euphemism for kill. Do better, would you? Be a writer. Have Abis Mal order his guys to, I don't know, mess Aladdin up. That's just off the top of my head. Abis Mal and his guys are chased away by the Agrabah Palace guards, and Aladdin makes the decision to hear Iago out, the bird having assisted in taking Abis Mal out of the fight. So Aladdin locks Iago in a cage and promises to put a good word in with the Sultan so he isn't executed on the spot. However, Aladdin makes the decision not to let Jasmine know that Iago is around until he's had a chance to soften her up a bit. Keeping secrets, once again, threatens to come between Aladdin and Jasmine. Side note, we're currently 15 minutes into the movie and nearly as far into the podcast. I feel like ever since the hiatus, I'm talking a lot more about every little detail of these movies than I used to. I don't know, I don't feel like I'm doing my process any differently, but last week's episode was the longest in the history of the podcast by a huge margin, so I don't know, something to keep in mind. Maybe I'll have to tweak things. Be more careful. Anyway, this scene between Aladdin and Jasmine is interrupted by the return of the genie. Yeah, there's a lot of Disney drama to discuss when it comes to the return of the genie. When Robin Williams took on the role, it was a rather unprecedented move, casting an A-list celebrity to voice a role in an animated film. Williams agreed to be paid scale for the role. Scale is sort of the Screen Actors Guild version of minimum wage. So he was brought on board as a celebrity guest, but paid as an actor of no marketable value whatsoever. In exchange, Williams' contract stipulated that, in essence, they couldn't use his presence to sell shitloads of tickets. E.g., they couldn't promote on the posters or trailers that they got Robin Williams, and the character of the genie couldn't dominate the advertising space. Basically, he was there to enrich the movie, not its marketing. Disney, as we all know, flagrantly disobeyed this contract, and Williams was, quite rightly, pissed off. You can't just completely ignore what it says on your contract, Disney. Dick move. And thus, Robin Williams and Disney had beef. And thus, for this film and most of the characters' appearances in the 20 years following the film, Genie was voiced by Dan Castellaneta, a popular character actor best known for his now 32 years playing the lead role on The Simpsons. What most people will tell you about Castellaneta's performance is that he's no Williams, but at least he sounds like Williams, to which I say, no, he doesn't, you're insane. Dan's Genie sounds nothing like Robin's Genie, by design. You see, Williams' contract also gave him the intellectual property rights to the character's voice, so anyone else playing the character couldn't do so in an impression of Williams. So Dan, even though he can be a voice match for Robin Williams, I believe he did so in, for instance, the Happy Feet video game, he doesn't even try here. Instead, Dan's Genie comes across as, well, Homer Simpson. A Homer Simpson who's a bit less buffoonish than the real deal, and better at impressions, but the impressions are never as sharp as they are coming from Robin Williams, because it's pretty clear that post-movie Genie's impressions and references are scripted rather than those moments where Robin Williams just kind of goes off. You really can't write those bits. Now, Robin had a semi-reconciliation with Disney in the mid-90s, which I'd wager had something to do with that hack Jeffrey Katzenberg leaving the company. He was persuaded, with a bribe of a very valuable original painting Disney had on hand, to return to the role of the genie in Aladdin and the King of Thieves, which naturally got starring Robin Williams plastered all over it. And from there he made the promise to return to the role of genie when he could, exclusively for educational material. So the computer game Disney's Math Quest with Aladdin, which I played often in my second grade computer lab class, that had Robin Williams in it. I never did finish that game. Couldn't save my progress, because it was always on a school computer, so I did the best I could. I got further and further the more often I played, but I don't think I ever actually finished the story. I can probably find a playthrough on YouTube or something. Anyway, a few short years before Robin's tragic self-inflicted death, he and the Walt Disney Company fully made amends, and I believe this reconciliation resulted in Robin dropping the bit where he owns Genie's voice. Because that year, Castellaneta was retired from the role of Genie, and it was passed along to Jim Meskimen, who's made some video game appearances, such as in Kingdom Hearts 2.5 and the Xbox game Disneyland Adventures. Many people are critical of Meskimen's performance, saying he doesn't sound a thing like Robin Williams. To which I say, yes, he does. You're insane. Here's the thing. Castellaneta as Genie doesn't do an impression of Robin's voice, but he gets the character's mannerisms down pretty well, being very manic, expressive, and versatile. Whereas Meskimen does a pitch-perfect imitation of the sound of Robin's voice, but his performance is very conversational, behaving more like Robin doing a stand-up routine or like just hanging out with you, rather than coming across like the Genie. Now, I've been obsessed with voice acting for the bulk of my life now, and when I point out a notable actor in a piece of animation, pointing to a character and saying the actor's name, I always get the same response. The voice? Eventually, I asked why people always ask me that, and I was told that it's just a rhetorical response, an expression of surprise, because most people can't recognize other people by the sound of their voice. I find that incredibly hard to believe, but if it's true, I guess it explains why most people think Castellaneta sounds like Williams and Meskimen doesn't, even though it's so blatantly very much the opposite. If most people can't actually hear what people in the voiceover biz call voice prints, then I guess it makes sense, because while Meskimen sounds like Williams, it's Castellaneta who acts like him. put the two together and you'd have a whole genie, I guess. I'm still not really sure if I believe it, but gosh, yeah, if it's true and most people can't recognize actors by their voice, well, then the celebrity voice actor trend is even more gratuitous than I thought. Oh, hello, kitten. Oh, do you hear purring? Little kitten just came to me. Yes, Robin Williams' role as the genie started a trend that's plagued the feature animation industry ever since. Disney cast a very famous actor to play a character in their animated film and, totally illegally, promoted the hell out of him in their advertising, and the film was a success and people in the industry got entirely the wrong idea. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't quite become industry standard until a decade later when Shrek became a big hit, thanks in part to the 4 actors who played the leads and were heavily promoted along the way. But it can definitely be traced back to Aladdin. Now sure, not everybody falls victim. Pixar doesn't. Their lead actors are usually A-list actors, but they're not obnoxious about it. They're basically just sure to cast people who are fun to work with and sound right in the role. Level of fame be damned. And ironically, Disney avoids the trend pretty well themselves. Most Disney voice actors are still lower-level celebrities, often taken from Broadway. If a Disney film has an A-lister in the cast, it's for very good reason. And DreamWorks, who really kicked off the trend, well, they seem to have realized that it annoys people, so while they do still get an all-star cast and give them a disproportionate amount of presence in the end credits, they're not so much plastered all over the posters anymore. But all the other companies, Blue Sky, Illumination, any low-budget knockoff studio that managed to get their hands on some C-list has-been, usually Rob Schneider, to act in their film, they blow all the budget that could have gone into giving the film actual good art into a completely gratuitous, utterly miscast assortment of famous actors, and make those actors the centerpiece of the film's promotion and advertising. And it's been this way since the year 2000, and I can't imagine that it's ever once successfully convinced someone to buy a film. So trends like this are supposed to fucking die, not linger for 20 years. The animation world is a really cool place in spite of that trend, not because of it. So, massive tangent, sorry about that. We now return to The Return of Jafar. So the now Castellaneta-voiced genie has returned to Agrabah. While it clearly hasn't been very long since the end of the, I don't want to call it the first film, the real film, Genie has decided to cut his trip around the world short. He'd rather spend his life with his friends. I always like the song he sings on the subject, though, now that I hear it again, the verses are actually just really hectic and annoying. It's the chorus that's the good part. That's a shame. A song should be really good all the way through, you know? And so that's all the pretext we get for Genie rejoining the main cast of the Aladdin franchise. Kinda negates the tearful goodbye he had with Al at the end of the film, but could you really imagine an entire Aladdin series without him? The trouble is, a character with phenomenal cosmic powers could easily eliminate every source of conflict in such a franchise, and so the nature of genies is retconned a bit. I think I discussed this when I talked about K&K genies in the proper Aladdin episode. The notion the writers of the Aladdin franchise went with is that genies are virtually omnipotent when in the process of granting wishes, but at any other time, a genie is merely a very powerful shape-shifting sorcerer type. Ergo, a freed genie, by default, is capable of much less miraculous things than a captive one. Unfortunately, they often had to make Genie rather clumsy and incompetent to make even that work. The series made a running gag out of calling Genie's powers semi-phenomenal and nearly cosmic, which I never realized before actually started right here in this movie, long before he's done any actual fighting. I guess they wanted to preempt any confusion about just how powerful he is by establishing right out the gate that he's just not what he used to be. Now, also, as I may have mentioned, he still wears shackles around his wrists, even though those were explicitly marks of his imprisonment because, well, he looks naked without them. Another note here, Aladdin and Jasmine do a little bit of singing at the end of Genie's song here. Jasmine's usual singing voice, Leah Salonga, who sang for the character not only in Aladdin, but also in virtually all Disney princess-related side materials, she sat out the film's 2 sequels, leaving Jasmine's singing to instead be handled by Liz Calloway, who, as it turns out, makes a pretty good living being a singing double for characters in fairly knockoffy things, such as Richard Rich's The Swan Princess, Don Bluth's Anastasia, and as the daughter of Simba and Nala in The Lion King 2. Meanwhile, Abismal is out in the desert fetching some water from a well. I guess the guards didn't catch him. His cronies are preparing to backstab and overthrow him, but fortunately for Abismal, or perhaps not, this is the very well where Iago ditched Jafar's lamp, and Abismal is giving it a polish just as his guys are preparing to murder him, releasing the terrifying Red Genie. Jafar quickly realizes that he's bound to the lamp, his own wrist shackles making him physically incapable of moving too far away from the lamp's location, and also realizes that since he's a genie, he can't kill Aladdin. Continuity error, maybe? In the original, Jafar didn't know the 3 limitations. He wished for Jasmine to fall in love with him and interrupted Genie before he could explain. Perhaps now that he is a genie, he knows these rules intuitively. Sure, why not? So, unable to enact his revenge on his own, he turns to his new master. Abismal finds him too intimidating to speak coherently, so Jafar shapeshifts into his old human form, wearing the outfit he wore when he was the most powerful sorcerer in the world, and so looks like that for most of the film. Jafar demands to be taken to Agrabah, but Abismal has enough cunning in him to realize that Jafar needs his help. So he doesn't let Jafar forget that he, Abismal, is owed 3 wishes. Jafar, however, swiftly gets the upper hand. When Abismal wishes for a legendary sunken treasure, Jafar transports him to the bottom of the sea where the treasure is, then forces him to waste his second wish on being saved from drowning. Hey, that was Aladdin's second wish too. Jafar promises he won't fuck up Abismal's final wish if he helps him with his revenge. Now, what I love about Disney villains, their voice actors are always in absolute top form. Jonathan Freeman clearly doesn't give a damn that this is a much smaller project than the original Aladdin. He is giving it his all, just as much as he ever did. Did I mention that when the Aladdin Broadway show started, fairly recently, Jonathan Freeman originated the role of Jafar? He spoke in interviews about the very first script reading, and the look of dawning comprehension on his fellow actors' faces when he started reading his lines, and they realized that they were acting alongside the actual original Jafar. That must have been a career highlight. Back at the palace, we finally get around to a plot thread that's taken up almost the entire first act of the film, Aladdin having been invited to dinner with the Sultan. Genie joins them and does a bit of hibachi stuff for the Sultan's amusement. The Sultan is another character for whom they could not get the original actor from the film to return for the larger franchise. While played by Douglas Seal in the film, from this sequel onward, the Sultan is played by Val Betton, the same actor who played Dr. Dawson in The Great Mouse Detective. So the business at hand is that the Sultan has decided to give Aladdin the recently vacant job of Royal Vizier. I'm not seeing the big deal there. Aladdin is engaged to Jasmine and is therefore destined to be Sultan one day, an issue already discussed in the first film. Then again, when that happened, Jafar was very much still employed, and while the Sultan has his eyes on his legacy, I imagine he's not planning on dying anytime soon. I'm really good at rationalizing plot holes. And, alright, Castellaneta's genie is starting to annoy me. How far in are we now? 25 minutes? Oi. Anyway, the subject of viziers naturally turns to the subject of Jafar and Iago, a subject that gets both Genie and the Sultan rather steamed up, making Aladdin nervous about his help with Iago's redemption plan. Meanwhile, Abu is watching over Iago when Raja turns up and furiously tackles the caged parrot, breaking the cage and allowing Iago to escape into the palace, revealing himself to the intimate family dinner. Aladdin backs up Iago's lies about having been enchanted by Jafar, and the royals, they don't really buy it. We see here some of the long-lasting tension between Aladdin and Rasul, the captain of the guards, played again by Jim Cummings. Rasul was very minor in the original film, but has a lot more to do in the wider franchise. Sultan agrees to Aladdin's terms of keeping an eye on Iago, but Jasmine is furious at Aladdin for being deceitful. Genie catches Iago pondering that he owes Aladdin one, and convinces the parrot to perform the first good deed of his life, in his own unique Iago sort of way. Iago goes to Jasmine and sings the song Forget About Love, a reverse psychological sort of song about how none of her history with Aladdin really matters in the end, it wasn't worth it. And naturally it works, and convinces Jasmine to extend Aladdin her forgiveness. It's a rather good song, one that's stuck with me for many years. And so, for the first time, the gang's all here. Aladdin, Jasmine, and all 4 of their sidekicks now. Genie, Abu, Iago, and Carpet. I once saw a great commercial on Toon Disney on the subject of Aladdin's many sidekicks. Iago further proves his loyalty by shooing off the rest of the sidekicks so Aladdin and Jasmine can be alone. Regrettably, Iago doesn't have long to enjoy the perks of being a good guy when Jafar comes to him, demanding his assistance in bringing down Aladdin. Iago tries to persuade Jafar against this idea, but is too terrified of Jafar to refuse outright. So, Iago suggests to Aladdin that he can patch things up with the Sultan by having a private conference at a scenic spot. One of the most famous moments in this film comes when Iago briefly considers fessing up, only for Jasmine's curtains to sprout gigantic eyes, Jafar's eyes, which glare at Iago sternly until he lets up. It tops the Nightmare Fuel page, I'm sure. So, Aladdin, the Sultan, Carpet, and Iago set off on their trip. Meanwhile, Jafar confronts Genie and Abu at their picnic, getting Genie out of the way quickly so his plans won't be spoiled. Here, Genie drops another of the film's actually appreciated moments. He assures Abu that genies can't kill anybody. Jafar responds by blasting the pair of them with a gout of fire, and a badly burned Genie remarks the film's recurring line, "But you'd be surprised what you can live through." It's played for comedy in this moment, but it definitely boosts Jafar's sinister edge when it's repeated later, and is a moment of hope at the film's end. You gotta love a line that can pull triple duty like that. And here, baby, we get Jafar's true villain song. In the real movie, he only had a brief evil reprise of Prince Ali. Here, he gets an original number all his own, called You're Only Second Rate, complete with wild visuals that make it his very own evil version of Friend Like Me. It is glorious. In the number, he proves that as a wish-granting genie, he can easily outmatch the freed genie, trapping him in a glass orb and shackling Abu to a dungeon wall. At their own picnic site, seemingly some sort of ancient ruin atop a waterfall, Aladdin and the Sultan bond, and the Sultan sees Aladdin's perspective on why it was a good idea to give Iago another chance. But soon Abismal and a bunch of mercenaries ambush them and kidnap the Sultan. Aladdin quickly realizes that Iago is responsible and takes off after them. Even though the mercenaries have bat-winged horses, Jafar's machinations no doubt, Aladdin catches up to them on Carpet and there's a chase scene, ending with Aladdin pitching over the waterfall, but one of these masked mercenaries, using some sort of levitation magic, makes sure he survives to harmlessly float down the river. When Abismal and the mercenaries set down on their evil winged horses, all of the mercenaries and horses turn out to be extensions of Jafar, who explains that he spared Aladdin's life because that's simply not the kind of revenge they're after. Jafar compliments Iago, who is ashamed. Aladdin awakens on the riverbank late at night and sets to walking back to Agrabah. Jafar and Abismal imprison the Sultan and Carpet back in the dungeon. Where is this dungeon? Is it the Agrabah Palace dungeons? I believe it is. Aladdin makes his way back to the castle, where Rasul promptly arrests him for murdering the Sultan, on the evidence of a dagger and the shredded remains of the Sultan's turban found by Jasmine in Aladdin's room. Jasmine orders Aladdin's execution at dawn, except the Jasmine who found the evidence is actually Jafar, who has locked the real Jasmine away with all the other heroes. So that's Jafar's revenge, not only for Aladdin to die, but for him to die without hope. Jasmine swears to see Iago suffer for his complicity, while Jafar praises him for turning against his true friends. At dawn, Rasul prepares to execute Aladdin. Yeah, I really don't see how I was ever supposed to like Rasul in the first place. In the original movie, he starts off making sense. He's a lawman chasing down the thief Aladdin, then hunting him down when he seems to have kidnapped the princess. But then Rasul gleefully sticks Prince Ali in a bag and hurls him into the sea on Jafar's orders, keeping in mind that neither Rasul nor Jafar knew at the time that Ali was Aladdin. And I imagine through the series that Rasul and Aladdin have a rivalry, because Rasul used to chase him around and now has to take orders from him, but this bit, where Rasul absolutely relishes the thought of executing Aladdin, I mean, come on, I know you didn't like the guy and you think now that he murdered your sultan, but come on, this is the princess's boyfriend, and again, the sultan's just been murdered. Treat the situation with some somberness, would you? And so, once Jafar leaves to watch the execution, disguised as Jasmine, Linda Larkin does a great job playing Jafar as Jasmine, taunting the real Jasmine. Gosh, Jasmine's sultry voice works so well when she says evil things. Linda Larkin would do a great job voicing villains if she ever got any roles other than Jasmine. And of course, the older Larkin gets, the less sultry Jasmine becomes. Past decade or so, she just sounds kind of breathy. Anyway, the moment Jafar is out the door, Iago instantly starts trying to free Genie from his glass orb. And we return to Razul enjoying himself way too much, receiving a sharpened scimitar with which to cut off Aladdin's head and his executioner's hood. Once Aladdin's on the chopping block, Jafar arrives to say goodbye and briefly flashes his real face at Aladdin so the boy can know who really killed him. Soon, Iago succeeds at breaking Genie from his prison and, okay, they manage to squeeze out a legitimately awesome Genie moment from his heavily nerfed post-movie version of the character. See, the orb shatters at the exact same moment Razul starts swinging his sword, and Genie instantaneously bursts out of the dungeon and whisks Aladdin away. That was fantastic. Genie then liberates the rest of the heroes, everybody alive and well and reunited, and Iago having fully redeemed himself. Iago's not interested in tender moments right now. He'd rather run away. Everyone else shoots down that idea. They need to stop Jafar before he lays waste to Agrabah. Iago refuses to assist, and everyone's okay with that. Jafar is now prepared for his takeover. He demands that Abismal wish for his freedom, but Abismal refuses, wanting at least one wish for himself. The heroes attempt to snatch the lamp from Abismal, but Jafar catches them, and there's a big confrontation on the palace grounds. Not quite as spectacular as Jafar's previous third act showdown, but still pretty good. The heroes use all their wits and powers to chase Jafar's lamp around the grounds. Eventually, Jafar opens a great crack in the earth, and they do battle in a lake of lava. This is iconic. The final battle with Jafar in the first Kingdom Hearts game takes place in a lake of lava, just like this one. There wasn't a lake of lava in the first movie. Oh, wait, yeah, there was. It was in the Cave of Wonders, which is where the lava lake battle in Kingdom Hearts happens, but Aladdin didn't fight Jafar in it. It was just an escape scene, yeah? So that Kingdom Hearts battle with Jafar was surely inspired by this one. For that matter, the Agrabah plotline in the second Kingdom Hearts game was basically an adaptation of this movie, though a much, much looser adaptation than what Kingdom Hearts normally does. Jafar seems to have Aladdin on the ropes when Iago swoops in and snatches the lamp. Jafar zaps Iago with magic, but the wounded Iago still manages to kick Jafar's lamp into the lava. As the lamp melts away, Jafar suffers a painful death by disintegration. Agrabah returns to normal, and Aladdin cradles the seemingly dead Iago in his arms. But genies can't kill, so in short order, Iago returns to consciousness. Later, Aladdin rejects the Sultan's offer of being the vizier, to Iago's horror. He'd rather not have a palace job, he'd rather go out and have some adventures. Which leads us to the Aladdin television series, a series popular enough for Disney to break certain trends. You see, most animated series at the time lasted for exactly 65 episodes, for syndication purposes. That way, after a series was over, you could air 5 reruns every week for an entire summer. But the Aladdin series proved popular enough that the second season alone lasted 69 episodes. Nice. Plus 9 in the first season and 8 in the third. Disney television seasons are really honkin' weird. And so, yeah, that was the movie. It took 5 people to write this story and 8 to do the screenplay. Sheesh, that's capitalism for you. I don't know in what way it's capitalism. I suppose in capitalism you want to pay as few people as possible. But under capitalism you don't care about what makes for the best story, just for what sells the best. Well, whatever. This is Return of Jafar. Capitalism is the reason it exists, to squeeze some more money out of a 300-year-old intellectual property that Disney had recently made bank on. And I like it. These are super fun characters, and I'm excited to see their adventures in the TV series. Sadly, the Aladdin and Tarzan TV series still aren't on Disney+, and if they weren't there at launch and still aren't now, I don't expect they ever will be. But fans to this day continue to watch bootleg versions with the Toon Disney watermark in the corner. If the time comes and goes that this Disney collection is complete and there's still no way to legally watch Aladdin the series or The Legend of Tarzan, I'm gonna get me some of those pirated copies. Now, I'm not looking forward to it, but if you won't give a paying fan a way to legally consume the stuff, I pay my Disney Plus subscription every month. You made me resort to this, Disney! How I can resort to media piracy, one may ask, when I can't even figure out how to get past copy protection so I can make the same Let's Play videos and reaction videos that everybody else in the world makes. Well, I've got a gal who gets all her television via piracy. She intends to watch Gargoyles that way once I start releasing those retrospectives that were made like a year ago, so I imagine she'll hook me up with some pirated films when the time comes. So anyway, yeah, this movie, despite being an Aladdin movie, Aladdin didn't have much of the spotlight. This movie was very much Iago's journey to bring us up to speed so we're not alarmed when in the TV series, Iago is included among the main cast. Same with Genie to a lesser extent. And we even have a post-credits scene revealing that even though night has fallen, Abismal is still stuck in a tree, complaining about how he doesn't get his third wish. Cute. Alright, now let's watch a real Disney film, The Lion King. After Beauty and the Beast scored a Best Picture nomination, Disney thought maybe they could try to make another movie worthy of that honor, and so they commenced work on Pocahontas. Wait, what? Yeah. The Lion King was also in development at the time, but nobody at the studio really cared. They were making Pocahontas. The only people who were actively working on The Lion King were people who got booted off of Pocahontas and, like, the furries on staff, those few loonies who volunteered to work on the lion film instead of the human film. But then, in 1994, The Lion King came out, a year or so before Pocahontas was ready to premiere. It became the most successful animated film of all time. As of this week, it remains only one of 3 films on the list of top 100 highest-grossing movies of all time to have been released before the year 2000, a distinction it shares with cinematic juggernauts Titanic and Jurassic Park. Oh, and The Phantom Menace, apparently. It must have gotten back onto the top 100 after a re-release or something. And then the year after that, Pocahontas came out, and nobody really gave a shit. It did not get that Best Picture nod, which, granted, The Lion King didn't either. And, yeah. Nobody in the world really appreciates the way Disney applied their signature fairy tale Disneyfication to a time and place and people who actually existed and still do and are both then and now going through some shit. But we'll talk about Pocahontas next time. Anyway, The Lion King. I've never been super into it as an inspiration for Keys and Kingdoms because I like my Disney animated canon characters to be fuckable, and I'm not into lions. Well, at least I'm not into non-anthropomorphic lions. Put Nala's head on a human body and we'll talk. Fuckability aside, the thing about this film is there are absolutely no humans in it, nor any signs of human passage. This story, set on the untouched savannas of Africa, might take place 1,000 years in the past, or right now, or even in some universe where humans never existed. So, I don't know. What I come to a Disney feature for is inspiration for costume designs and architectural designs, and there are no costumes or architecture in this film. Rather dazzling scenery, of course. And, of course, this film is definitely super relevant, like I said. It's where the Renaissance peaked. It's kind of a big deal. There has to be something, I told myself some time ago, there has to be something it, in particular, can bring to the Keys and Kingdoms universe. Enter the wildlife theme. I don't really think about the themes anymore. I've been focusing exclusively on the main high fantasy setting of Cosmos, but let's talk about the themes regardless. The themes, again, not mentioned for some time, were fairy tales, mythic, pirates, cowboys, tribes, aliens, urban, and then retroactively, wildlife. Cosmos has fairy tales, though, thus far I've been writing the world from the perspective of very low-level adventurers, so I haven't seen much reason to see a lot of princesses and castles and shit. It also has mythic, with the gods and all, and tribes, you can put barbarians anywhere. And pirates? Haven't written any pirates in, but there could be pirates. So that leaves cowboys, aliens, and urban. I really can't imagine myself ever writing an entire cowboy-themed RPG world. I don't know. What was the rest of the world like during those, brief couple of decades when the Wild West was a thing? I like westerns, but not that much. Aliens, sure. By aliens, I mean the sci-fi themed settings. Mostly I want to recreate things like Tron existing in the K&K world. Could that happen in Cosmos? Could there be computers and virtual realities in Cosmos? Because I kind of want Cosmos as a setting to be all things Disney. And then urban, spies and superheroes and other action movie tropes. Yeah, fuck, I don't know, man. Maybe the themes just aren't a thing anymore. Maybe it's all just high fantasy. We have Cosmos, we have Crystals. See, I'm pondering making Crystals into a Keys and Kingdoms campaign setting, one fairly distinct from Cosmos. But anyway, there was the wildlife theme. Lion King, Bambi, one might make an argument for Lady and the Tramp and 101 Dalmatians belonging in this theme too. Stories from the perspective of animals. These are Disney staples, and while I'd love to design an RPG world from such a perspective, I'm not sure how, If you're a lion, well, you're a roughly even match with a tiger or a brown bear. These are all animals with a challenge rating of 1 in the D&D book. And if you're a deer, then a lion will just kick your butt. I think there's a tabletop RPG inspired by Watership Down. Well, I'll jot this stuff down in my blog about how to handle these various themes. And then maybe someone can tell me what kind of RPG system will work best for such a thing. As I've said, I'm primarily concerned with a system that makes it a fairly different experience if you're playing as a Mishka, even if you have some human companions. Anyway, we'll figure that out later, when we have some real RPG-making assistance. For now, I'm primarily focused on building Cosmos as a world. We'll get around to the gaming part later. For now, Lion King. We all know how this film begins, with a dazzling sunrise and our singer belting out the words, Nan Tingonya Mabagiti Baba. Disney took an interesting approach with this film's music. Well, first of all, our score was by Hans Zimmer. He's one of the greats. Then we have our songwriting team. The lyrics were by Sir Tim Rice. The compositions were by Sir Elton John. And the oft-overlooked third ingredient, a young South African musician called Lebo M, brought the African flair. And it's Lebo M, not to be confused with the Italian opera La Boheme, spelled very differently, who plays us in with his stirring recitation of Nansinkonyama. The lyrics to this introduction that leads into Circle of Life are in the Zulu language and amount to some really dull and boring stuff about how there's a lion, let's go get it. Wait, that's not a dull subject at all. Well, seeing the English translation of the Zulu lyrics makes it look dull. It's worth mentioning already that this dynamic style of songwriting team, consisting of one traditional songwriter, one very successful pop star, and one musician native to the geographical region being represented, was replicated by Disney in Moana, with Lin-Manuel Miranda in the Elton John role, Opataya Fawai in the Lebo M role, and then the other guy. So this introduction, The Circle of Life, the English parts sung by Carmen Twiley, who, as I mentioned last time, played a few incidental characters in The Nightmare Before Christmas, and those are the two things she's done with her life. We have all the animals on the African savannah making their way to Pride Rock, where the King of the Lions is displaying his newborn son. It's basically one of the most dazzling introductions to any movie ever, animated or otherwise. So, why do these animals kneel down to and celebrate the lions who, eat them? Well, I talked about that in a philosophical discussion in the Kingdom Hearts fanfic I mentioned earlier, but I don't remember what the conclusion was. It's definitely something worth examining if, we ever actually do the wildlife theme. So after our opening, you know it, there's never been anything else like it. I haven't seen the version of this opening scene from the photorealistic remake, but I'd be willing to bet it looks absolutely pathetic. After the intro, we come upon Scar, played by Jeremy Irons, the scrawny and overly sinister brother to the king, being visited first by Zazu, played by Rowan Atkinson, the king's advisor, to announce the arrival of King Mufasa, played by James Earl Jones. Yes, While Aladdin started the tradition of casting A-list celebrities in animation, The Lion King was pretty much the first animated film to have a downright all-star cast. And it works because, I don't know, back in the 20th century, most celebrities actually had interesting voices. Now they all sound the same, and so all animated characters sound the same. So this very brief scene between Scar and Mufasa serves to exposit that Scar wants to be the king, but now that Simba exists, he doesn't really have a shot, and he resents his older brother and newborn nephew for it. As far as super telegraphed bad guys go, he could easily beat out Jafar. Elsewhere, we come upon Rafiki, who presided over the ceremony in the opening scene. Sorry, got super distracted for a second there. I don't know if you heard. That was the cat walking across the piano. That was kind of alarming. Anyway, we get back to Rafiki. He's a stylized baboon character. He mostly looks like a mandrill, but with some features from other kinds of baboons, most prominently a tail, which mandrills don't have. They stylized a lot of the main animal characters in this film. Basically every non-lion who's an actual character doesn't much resemble their real-world counterpart. Zazu looks nothing like a hornbill, Pumbaa doesn't look much like a real warthog, and you can kind of see why when you see these characters in the remake. They're hideous as photoreal depictions of their species. Why did that goddamn thing get made? Anyway, Rafiki, played by Robert Guillaume. Appropriately for a primate character, he's the only character in this film to possess any sort of technology. He wields a staff and does some painting, and apparently magic, as he's able to read the future and eventually bring forth a big-ass cloud ghost, the only overtly supernatural elements in the film. Guess he's something of a shaman or court wizard to Mufasa, and apparently a good friend, as the two hug when they meet in the prologue. He doesn't live near Pride Rock. He lives inside a giant baobab tree somewhere out in the savannah. Except in Kingdom Hearts 2, in which he lives in a cave right at the base of Pride Rock, a rare post-Kingdom Hearts 1 creative liberty regarding Disney geography. We then dissolve into, probably not much later. Most animals grow up real fast, so we got a slightly older, young Simba, say the equivalent of a human, around 10 to 12 years old, played by Jonathan Taylor Thomas. Thomas was a pretty big teen heartthrob back in the 90s. I assume this movie's dialogue was recorded before that, as his voice hasn't dropped. But he pretty much retired from acting once he hit adulthood, only ever returning to face the cameras when his former TV dad, Tim Allen, needs a favor. Yeah, Tim Allen. We'll be talking more about him once we're done here. So on this morning, Mufasa brings Simba to the very crest of Pride Rock. Not the part where Simba was presented to the masses, but the part way above that. And he shows him the sunrise, explaining that everything the light touches is the Lion Kingdom. Simba asks about a shadowy valley which is not bathed in sunlight, and Mufasa says, "Simba, what the fuck did I just say?" No, he doesn't say that. I can't even take credit for it. That's a meme I saw once. So Mufasa explains that the shadowy place is beyond their borders. And he talks about the circle of life, the balance of nature. It's not a thing that's really delved into. They don't explain what a king's job actually is in this otherwise very naturalistic setting. Zazu comes in with the morning report. Not the song version, thank God. The song Morning Report is god-awful, and on the DVD version I used to have, unlike with Beauty and the Beast and Human Again, you don't get the option of watching the theatrical version of the film that doesn't include the addition of that song. It's so nice to finally see this scene again. It's been so long. Zazu's horrible animal puns are relegated back to the background. Mufasa and Simba's pouncing lessons are back to being the focus of the scene, and there's no jarring transition where Zazu is suddenly played by Jeff Bennett instead of Rowan Atkinson. No disrespect to Jeff Bennett, he's my favorite, as you know, and Zazu certainly seems to be a character that would be in his wheelhouse, but for whatever reason he can't quite pull it off. Considering he's the first person in the world to play over 2,000 animated characters, I think we can allow him a few duds on that resume. Though he no longer holds the record for most career voice roles, I think D. Bradley Baker beat him out recently. Anyway, Zazu gets a report from some kind of gopher or something about hyenas having crossed the border, and Mufasa goes to deal with the matter personally. If you ask me, this is a place where those douches who think they're edgy for dunking on Disney films all the time kind of have a point. The hyenas being outcast from the Pride Lands seems to be based on nothing more than bigotry. Lions are in charge, but leopards and cheetahs are mentioned and seen as being Pride Land citizens, and there's really nothing more violent about hyena hunting habits than there is with, any other carnivore. The common image you may have in your head about lions going on a hunt and having their kill stolen by hyenas is far more likely to happen the other way around, since, lions are a lot bigger than hyenas and also hunt in groups, ergo lions can beat up hyenas, and lions generally don't hunt themselves. Lions default to being scavengers, not hunters. Our villainous hyenas are just second-class citizens willing to riot to get their basic civil rights. Those kinds of people are always on the right side of history. I believe this is addressed, funnily enough, in the 2015 animated series The Lion Guard, which has at least one good hyena character who makes the case that hyenas belong in the circle of life just as much as anybody else. Haven't seen much of that show, don't really intend to. It certainly does its best to make the Lion King universe, culture, and ecology make some sense. It doesn't always work. Like when our titular guard organization prevent a cobra from eating a mouse, that doesn't make the cobra evil, he's gotta eat. Nor when, after they've established that not all of the hyenas defy the balance of nature, they then introduce jackals who all do. It's a kid's show, and this isn't really a universe where you can present the actual system of morality on the untouched African savanna to children. With his dad off doing the border patrol thing, Simba goes to nag his uncle Scar about how one day he's going to be king of the Pride Lands. Scar is, well, honestly kind of a mood in this scene, a murderous intent notwithstanding. We've all had to deal with a talkative little kid telling us a meandering story, yeah? So Scar lets slip that the shadowy place beyond the northern border is the elephant graveyard. Naturally, Simba wants to go. So he goes to fetch his gal pal Nala, played by Nikita Calamé. You can tell she's very special because she's the only lion in the movie to have blue eyes instead of brown, whilst Scar has green eyes. Their eyes are most definitely love interest colored and villain colored, respectively. Oh, and all the lions in the film have yellow scleras. Sclera is the clinical term for the whites of the eyes, and the lions in this film, like many other Disney felines, have yellow scleras instead of white. This gives their eyes the full range of expressiveness that a human character would have, while still making them look animalistic, since in real life, creatures other than humans usually don't have visible scleras at all. In this scene, we get our first major appearance of Simba's mother, Sarabi, played by Madge Sinclair, and the only notable appearance of Nala's mother, Serafina, played by Zoe Leader. And looking at her, I was wrong. Serafina also has blue eyes, which makes sense. Nala's mom and all. As for the identity of Nala's father, let's be real here, it's probably Mufasa. Because that's how lions work. Our hero and his love interest are probably half-siblings. There's no need to be grossed out by it. That's just how lions work. Writers of the wider Lion King franchise actually put a lot of effort into establishing that in this universe that's not how lions work. The Lion King 2 features a romance between Simba's daughter and Scar's heir, but the writers were sure to stick in a couple of spots where it's made explicit that Kovu is merely Scar's chosen successor, not his biological son, because that would make he and Kiara, second cousins? Cousins twice removed? I'm not sure which is the right term, but not really that big a deal, In most monarchies, dating one's own second cousin is probably seen as trying to have it all when you've got plenty of perfectly good first cousins to choose from. And the Lion Guard finally, eventually, so I hear, took a moment to tell us who Nala's father is. I mean, I don't know about actually tell us who he is, just showcase him in a flashback to make it clear that he is neither Mufasa nor Scar, and that therefore Simba and Nala are not immediate family. Cowards. Simba bluffs to the moms that he and Nala are going to visit the watering hole. Hey, I had a dream just last night about a bunch of African savanna animals at a watering hole. It was really cool, almost as cool as witnessing such a thing in real life. Simba tells Nala where they're really going in whispers, so to get there they have to ditch their chaperone Zazu, which they do by launching into the musical number I Just Can't Wait to Be King. Young Simba's singing double is one Jason Weaver, and they don't quite match. It's just a bit too obvious that Weaver is black, and that more to the point that he's not Jonathan Taylor Thomas. Interestingly, most of the actors playing lions in this movie are black, which makes a degree of sense as lions come from Africa. I will pay the 2019 Lion King remake one compliment, in that they made a change from most of the actors playing lions being black to all of them. That was a very nice touch. Not that any of the actors in that film did anything resembling a good job from what I've seen. Now, when the movie first came out, I checked out the soundtrack. Specifically, I was curious about Chiwetel Ejiofor and Seth Rogen. I had never heard either of them sing and wanted to see if they could. In fact, no. No, they cannot. Now, Nikita Calame's Nala. Young Nala has a sassy black girl characterization, both in Calame's voice acting and in her animated mannerisms, but those are removed from adult Nala, who's played by a white actress. I mean, that's the thing I really like about animation, that I do like. That one character can be played by a black girl when she's young and a white woman when she grows up. That kind of colorblind casting really doesn't work in live-action film or television, and while it's often an accepted convention in live theater, it does take the audience out of the moment for a split second. But I don't know, it just feels like Nala somehow got anglicized during the time skip, and it doesn't really feel right. There's been some shifting in the animation industry just this year. Most animated sitcoms are recasting all of their non-white characters who were previously played by white actors and bringing in voice actors of the appropriate ethnicity. Opinions on this are divided, and I'm a bit torn myself. On the one hand, it's always a good thing to see more roles for actors of color opening up, especially when those roles are actual humans who share that actor's background instead of, like, orcs and stuff. But on the other, one of the beautiful things about voice acting is that you can be anybody. No one in the cast of Aladdin was actually Middle Eastern, but how can you beat the perfection of Jonathan Freeman's Jafar? Most of the cast of Mulan was of East Asian descent, but if they all had to be, then we wouldn't have Harvey Firestein's Yao or Miguel Ferrer's Shan Yu. Now, sure, you look at a role like Diane Nguyen on BoJack Horseman, I think that role genuinely should have been played by an Asian actress instead of Alison Brie. Sadly, Brie took until the end of the series to agree with me. But elsewhere, a huge part of the charm of The Simpsons, for example, is that most of the men in Springfield are played by the same three actors. Now, as of season 32, they're changing that, though I have to ask, who the heck is watching the 32nd season of The Simpsons? Like, for realsies. I'll grant you, African Americans do generally have their own accent and vernacular, regardless of which part of the country they're from, and when a white person imitates that accent, it comes across pretty fucking crass, but still. The Simpsons, with Hank Azaria as Carl and Harry Shearer as Dr. Hibbert, or even how on Family Guy Mike Henry played Cleveland. These were great performances that weren't stereotypical. I don't think they strictly needed to be recast the way they have been this season. Though, again, who's watching The Simpsons Season 32 or the morally reprehensible trash fire that Family Guy has been for the past 10 years? I don't know. Let's look at, say, Samurai Jack. Our protagonist, the very Japanese Samurai Jack, is played by Phil Lamar, a black man, and it's okay because it's a perfect performance for the character. Whereas the arch-villain Aku, formerly played by a Japanese actor, Mako Iwamatsu, but after his death, they went with Greg Baldwin, a very white guy. But he's clearly the most respectful choice they could have gone with to replace Mako because his imitation of Mako's voice and mannerisms is flawless. In short, it's fucking complicated, but overall, I don't think race is a thing you have to take super duper seriously in the voiceover industry. You want to avoid ethnic stereotypes, but that's just a thing you want to do everywhere, not just in animation. Like, I love Apu, but I'm not Indian. I respect that the South Asian community has a problem with him, and I respect Hank Azaria for stepping down from the role once he realized he was truly hurting people with it. To my knowledge, the character hasn't appeared for a couple of years, and I hope that if The Simpsons must insist on not dying, Apu comes back one day with a new voice actor, just as Carl did in the season 32 premiere. The aforementioned community, Americans of South Asian descent who have been critical of Apu's portrayal, they want Apu to come back as well. They're critical of the fact that the show's choice was to quietly get rid of him altogether. They just prefer that as The Simpsons evolves as a show over the decades, so too does Apu's character. Anyway, Lion King, I Just Can't Wait to Be King. Young Simba's musical number. About his belief that being king is all about getting your way all the time and being the center of attention. Nikita Calamé, incidentally, also has a singing double, though Nala only sings 2 lines in the song, one of which is sung in unison with Simba. And apparently this musical number was Nala's plan for ditching Zazu. How does that work? Like, ooh, let's put on a big trippy musical sequence whose choreography ends with Zazu being crushed by a rhino. I don't follow how that works. That being said, I have always loved the choreography of the number, especially the designs, the much more stylized animals that appear throughout it, including some anteaters on entirely the wrong continent. Anteaters are from South America. Africa has aardvarks. The 2 animals are often mistaken for each other and certainly have some anatomical similarities on account of their dietary similarities, but they're very different animals. Oh, and incidentally, just before the number, the duo learn from Zazu that they're betrothed, which they take issue with because they're friends and they find the idea of getting married awkward. This is never really addressed again. Rather, they meet again as adults and pretty clearly fuck each other off screen that very night, so, works out. So the elephant graveyard, they find their way there, and it's just as cool and spooky as they had hoped. There's some reality to this notion. Elephant herds really do have places where they go when they're dying, and they even hold primitive funeral rites of a sort. Smart and sensitive creatures, elephants, with very real and complex emotions. You know what I never noticed before? How massive the elephant bones are in the graveyard. There's a skull that's as big as a house, big enough to, hold the 3 hyenas so they can make a dramatic entrance coming out of its mouth and nose. Elephants are big, but they ain't that fucking big. Zazu catches up to them just as they encounter the 3 main members of the film's hyena pack. Their suave and sultry leader Shenzi, played by Whoopi Goldberg, her brutish second-in-command Banzai, played by Cheech Marin, and their psychopathic compatriot Ed, played by Jim Cummings. Ed doesn't speak, he only ever laughs maniacally, but regardless, he's the role that Cummings attributes to knowing that he made it as an actor, when his name was mentioned alongside those of Whoopi and Cheech in a Jeopardy clue that led to the answer, "What is the Lion King?" R.I.P. Alex Trebek, just died the other day. Speaking of Whoopi and Cheech, these are some of their best roles as well. Whoopi is usually typecast as being loud and obnoxious, while Cheech is often typecast as a goofball with a thick Mexican accent. But here, the pair of them are permitted to speak in their natural voices and be just as genuinely menacing as they are comical. So there's a big chase scene among the supergiant elephant bones, not to mention all the boiling geysers that seem ubiquitous in this region. Ooh, I forgot about this moment where Simba slashes Shenzi across the face with his claws, and Shenzi very slowly gets fucking pissed off. That's terrifying. Soon, the hyenas have the 2 cubs cornered. But soon enough, Zazu flies back with Mufasa in tow, and the pissed-off king frightens the loathsome scavengers away. Later that evening, Mufasa is still pissed off. He sends Nala and Zazu away and gives his son a tough lecture about responsibility and not walking into danger. They make amends. James Earl Jones is, of course, fantastic in this role because when is he not? The man, as they say, could read the phone book. Of course, it's 2020. What the hell is a phone book? Mufasa reminds Simba that he won't always be there to save him, that one day the sun will set on his time and rise with Simba's reign as king. But, it's said, all the kings of the past live among the stars to give guidance to the current king. Speaking of James Earl Jones, that earlier scene where he explains the circle of life to Simba was originally going to be a musical number, but no one could take Mufasa singing seriously. It was just too inherently funny, so they scrapped the song. Meanwhile, at the hyena's lair, they are chided by their boss, who, unsurprisingly, is Scar. This whole thing was, of course, an assassination attempt on Simba, and its failure has only resulted in Scar wanting to think bigger, coming up with a new plan to murder both the young prince and Mufasa himself. Before we talk about Scar's villain song, Be Prepared, I do want to mention the moment where Shenzi claims that every time she hears Mufasa's name, she shudders, and demonstrates this by having Banzai just say the name a couple of times. Mufasa, ooh! Mufasa, ooh! That's my grandpa's favorite part of the film. He likes to quote it to this very day. Also, I want to talk a bit about hyenas. Despite their rather canine appearance and behavior, on the phylogenetic tree of life, they're somewhere between dogs and cats. Closer to cats, despite being superficially rather dog-like. Also, they're matriarchal, hence Shenzi leading the trio in this film. Despite that, male and female hyenas are nearly indistinguishable, as female hyenas look an awful lot like they have penises, at least until the first time they give birth. I don't know why I felt the need to throw in some educational content about hyenas. I like zoology, I guess. Let's talk about Be Prepared. Classic villain song, complete with a whole lot of smoke and green light. You know you're dealing with a lot of villainy when the lighting goes all green. The lyrics are extremely sophisticated, which very much fits Scar's characterization. There's a terrifying moment when Shenzi, Banzai, and Ed unveil the rest of their pack. They have legions of hyenas, and those legions goose-step past Scar all Nazi-like while he sings the next verse. Subtle. Now here's what's easily the most interesting thing about this song. The last line before the final chorus, Scar's vicious snarl of, "You won't get a sniff without me!" Well, Jeremy Irons delivered that line so ferociously that he lost his voice. And for whatever reason, rather than wait a week or two for him to get better, they had Jim Cummings, who was on hand doing some backing vocals as Ed, step in to sing the final chorus as Scar. The transition is nearly seamless. Cummings' Scar is noticeably harsher and more gravelly than Irons', but it fits the tone of the verse, especially the way Irons set it up. When asked about the process of stepping in last minute to take over for somebody else, Cummings merely shrugs and says, "Well, that's my job." He is such a boss. The very definition of a top-notch voice actor. As I may have mentioned before, I do still believe that Jim Cummings is innocent of the various crimes of spousal abuse and animal abuse his ex-wife accused him of, but it might be worse. He might be a Republican. I had a rather nasty jolt some time ago, I think near the beginning of this year, when I saw a quote on Twitter which sounded enough like something James Woods would say, and was during one of those times where he finds himself unbanned from Twitter and starts peddling his hateful right-wing tripe there. So I assumed James Woods was the one who said it, and then my stomach turned when I saw the quote was in fact attributed to Jim Cummings, a hero of mine for nearly 20 years. Fortunately for me, I don't remember what the quote was, but it really shook me up. According to Jenny Nicholson, Cummings has always had the same politics as Woods, but people ignore it because they like Winnie the Pooh. I don't buy that. I really don't. James Woods is incredibly famous, and his voice and acting style are inimitable. Cummings, in the eyes of mainstream show business, is a much less valuable commodity. Surely if he'd always been as loathsome as Woods, he's never been famous enough to get away with it, they would have found a new Winnie the Pooh. It's not easy to do a Sterling Holloway impression, but there are people out there who can do it. Besides which, when Cummings started getting political on Twitter, again around the beginning of this year, most prominently when COVID was first coming into the public eye, he was an early adopter of the anti-mask "it's just the flu" position. His friends and co-workers, the same ones who celebrated when he was found not guilty of abusing his ex-wife and their puppy, were shocked and revolted, so that suggests to me that this is a fairly new thing for him. Gotta admit, my mom is a little bit vindicated here. For most of my life, I've called people in the voice acting industry my heroes, and Jim was my very favorite when I was young. My mom has always objected to this, telling me I can't call people heroes just because they're good performers. Voice actors aren't in the public eye, after all. For all I know, they beat their wives. Guess she was onto something. Not gonna tell her that, of course. So do I think all Republicans abuse women and animals? I mean, at this point, pretty much, yeah, I do kind of believe that. So I'm keeping my eye on Jim Cummings, but I can separate the art from the artist. I won't let it taint my enjoyment of the many great performances he's given Disney and other companies over the decades. I know that when he went out on Halloween last week, he wore a face shield, so at least he's not doubling down or anything. So the next day, Scar brings Simba to a gorge, telling him to wait there while he goes to fetch Mufasa for a surprise, while the hyena trio trigger a wildebeest stampede, which Scar hopes will claim the lives of both Simba and Mufasa. The stampede is, of course, visually dazzling. The wildebeests are done in CGI, I think maybe courtesy of a young Pixar, allowing there to be bazillions of them on screen at once. Then they're cel-shaded, which is what they call it when you render a CGI model so that it has outlines just like a traditionally animated figure, so they blend in better. I love cel shading as a technique. It's a great compromise between the quicker and easier procedure of CGI and the much bolder look of traditional animation. It's what helps Ruby and Genlock look a lot more like real anime, at least when you pause them, and helps Sophia the First look a bit more like the traditional Disney princess animation it pays tribute to. I dig it. Zazu, Mufasa, and Scar race to the gorge in an attempt to rescue Simba. Zazu has no power to actually, do anything. Simba's found some refuge from the stampede by climbing a small tree. Zazu obviously can't carry him, but he points him out to Mufasa, who dives right into the stampede to retrieve him. Zazu attempts to go back to Pride Rock for help, but Scar knocks him unconscious. Mufasa manages to get Simba out of the stampede, but gets himself caught in it and trampled. Soon, Simba sees the injured Mufasa clawing his way out of the gorge. As he nears the top, Mufasa asks Scar to help him, to which Scar replies, "Long live the king," and hurls Mufasa back into the gorge. Simba sees and hears none of this, only the falling body. I was once asked why people always say, "The king is dead, long live the king." Is that not self-contradictory? On the contrary, it's not contrary at all. Long live the king refers to the next guy. If the next guy is a chick, the saying goes, "The king is dead, long live the queen." You see? Moments later, the wildebeest herd finally passes by in its entirety, and Simba searches the valley for Mufasa, finding him dead. Unmarked, because it's a Disney film, but still, we spend a minute or two of the film with Mufasa's dead body, as Simba desperately tries to nudge him awake, and once he's unsuccessful, just putting the body's arm around his own shoulders for comfort. Dear fucking God. Then Scar comes to Simba. Seeing that Simba blames his own presence at the site of the stampede for his father's death, Scar agrees, and tells Simba to leave the Pride Lands and never return. Without hesitation, Simba does so. Moments later, he finds himself pursued by the hyena trio, but manages to escape them by slipping through a tangle of thorn bushes. Banzai calls after Simba in no uncertain terms that they'll kill him if he ever returns. I'll just assume Simba is too distraught to connect the dots there. It's a bit suspicious, sure, but why would he think that his beloved uncle had anything to do with the hyenas he just made enemies with? Now's a good time to mention that The Lion King's plot is said to have been inspired by William Shakespeare's Hamlet. Being a Disney film, it doesn't really follow the plot of Hamlet. It just takes inspiration from the story and characters and makes something new out of it. We have Simba in the role of Prince Hamlet, Mufasa as the late King Hamlet, Scar in the role of the treacherous King Claudius, and it gets a bit murky from there, but in theory, Zazu takes the role of Lord Polonius, while Timon and Pumbaa are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. I guess that makes Nala Ophelia, and Sarabi would be Queen Gertrude. Sarabi doesn't explicitly marry Scar after Mufasa's death, and if she does, she's not happy about it, but it works, and it could be what's going on behind the scenes. As far as the rest of the main characters of Hamlet goes, there's no Horatio or Laertes. I suppose if Simba had a best friend, that would make him much less vulnerable in the film's second half, and Nala doesn't need a vengeful older brother because she doesn't go insane and die. I love Hamlet. It's my favorite Shakespeare play. I was in 2 productions of it in elementary school, as the Gravedigger when I was in the 4th grade, and as Claudius when I was in the 5th grade. I read it voraciously every chance I get. I read that wrong. I read it voraciously every chance I get. Stupid English. I've read enough annotated versions that I can basically understand all the flowery dialogue, and like with everything I read, I love imagining my own interpretation. Like many greats have before me, I hope to someday direct myself in the role of Hamlet. I'm thinking we do it with sock puppets, unabridged, with the puppetry serving to make all the action on stage very clear. I hope such a piece might serve as a classroom teaching tool someday. Getting back to The Lion King, one thing I love about its straight-to-video Florida studio sequels is that, well, they do put some thought into replicating the first film's Shakespearean motifs. The Lion King 2 effectively puts a new generation of characters into a Romeo and Juliet retelling, while The Lion King 1.5 takes its premise from the Hamlet-inspired 1966 play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. Very influential play, Before that play, most Hamlet adaptations saw fit to trim the 5-hour-long play by cutting Rosengale out of the story entirely, a notion that's been unthinkable from 1966 onward. So that's where The Lion King, one of the few Disney films not explicitly based on some form of literature, got its story ideas. Visual design-wise, meanwhile, The Lion King is said to be a total ripoff of the 1960s anime series Kimba the White Lion. It sure looks incriminating when you put concept art from both projects side by side, but I'm pretty sure Disney has been vindicated from that particular accusation of ripoff artistry. I don't remember in what way. Anyway, later that evening, Scar reports the deaths of Mufasa and Simba, and with a heavy heart, sure pal, takes the throne for himself and immediately introduces the key ingredient to his reign of terror: racial integration, the horror. Isn't that kind of the opposite of, the Nazi imagery you were associating him with earlier? This hyena integration thing, well, it seems to play a part in the ecological disaster that follows, but we'll get to that when we get to that. In the meantime, Simba has wandered into the middle of the desert and collapsed from exhaustion and presumably lack of a will to live. Vultures start circling, like they do, but said vultures are scared off by the arrival of Timon and Pumbaa, respectively a meerkat and warthog, played by Nathan Lane, and Ernie Sabella. If you've ever wondered, a meerkat is a type of mongoose, and a mongoose is a herpestid, which is a family of small carnivorous mammals, which are a lot like mustelids, but not mustelids. Mustelids, in plain English, are weasels, a family that includes not only weasels and weasel-like things such as ferrets and minks, but also some surprisingly non-weasel-like things such as otters, badgers, and wolverines. Other creatures that are like mustelids but not actually mustelids, like somewhere on the branching path that belongs to the carnivorans, the order that includes most carnivorous mammals, in the branches near the actual weasel family, that includes raccoons and skunks. Raccoons and skunks are like mustelids but not actually in that family. And again, mongooses, perhaps most surprisingly, because mongooses, well, they certainly look an awful lot like they'd be mustelids, don't they? A warthog, more simply, is a kind of pig. As for Nathan Lane and Ernie Sabella, Timon and Pumbaa's history is ill-defined. The song Hakuna Matata indicates that Pumbaa is an outcast because he has a gas problem, while both The Lion King 1.5 and an earlier double-length episode of the TV series Timon and Pumbaa suggests that Timon's backstory sees him exiled from his meerkat colony after being assigned the job of sentry and failing to warn the colony of an invading predator. I know Timon originally had his own verse of Hakuna Matata to correspond to Pumbaa's, but I don't remember what the lyrics were, or if they're consistent to the version of the backstory presented in both of those divergent continuities. Either way, Timon and Pumbaa were outcasts and found each other. Lane and Sabella always had the personal headcanon that the duo are a romantic couple. Indeed, this helped Nathan Lane eventually come to terms with his own sexuality, though how you could look at Nathan Lane and think he's anything other than as gay as the day is long, well, I suppose that's a question to ask of the humans of the 20th century. They were blindsided by Liberace being gay too. And I like that interpretation, honestly. If and how they have any sort of sex life when Timon is small enough that he frequently paces back and forth across Pumbaa's face, I don't know. But I just like the interpretation of these two exiles being very much in love and their taking in of Simba being their shot at parenthood. Finally, it's noteworthy that Ernie Sabella is the longest-running Lion King cast member, having played Pumbaa in nearly every media appearance the character has ever made. Quite understandably, given the jovial, guttural voice he gives the character that's nigh impossible to replicate. By the time The Lion Guard premiered 22 years after the film, he was the only cast member from the original film to return. He narrowly beats out James Earl Jones, who appeared as Mufasa in the pilot episode of The Lion Guard, and of course reprised the role in the 2019 remake. Not a good idea in my opinion, whereas in most of Mufasa's Lion Guard appearances they bring out Gary Anthony Williams as an impersonator, leaving Sabella the only OG Lion King cast member to still be playing the canonical version of the character. I know episodes are suddenly a shitload longer than they used to be because I keep getting sore throats while recording them. Better start having some honey lemon ginger tea on standby, not just when I'm in a play, but also when I'm doing my podcast. And so Timon and Pumbaa. What brings them out of their idyllic oasis and into the desert? We don't know. Why do they chase off a band of circling vultures? Apparently purely for their own amusement. The end result, they've saved Simba's life. Pumbaa wants to nurse him back to health, and Timon agrees that having a lion for a friend might extend their lifespans in the long run. So they get him some water and revive him. They probe Simba for details about where he's come from and where he's going, but he's not receptive to either their questions or Timon's attempts at cracking jokes. And this brings us to Hakuna Matata. Timon assures Simba that what you have to do when your past is troubling you is to forget about it. Turn your back on it. Hakuna Matata. A popular Swahili expression that Tim Rice and Elton John picked up from a phrasebook. Literally, it means there are no worries, though more colloquially, and the way it's translated in the film, simply, no worries. Not a lot of African language is employed here in the original Lion King film. The opening of Circle of Life is in Zulu, and most of the character names are mundane Swahili words. Simba means lion, Mufasa means king, and so on. But Hakuna Matata is the only prominent phrase used. They get a little bit more African with it in the Lion King expanded universe. The sequel has popular South African men's choir Ladysmith Black Mambazo singing backup on Rafiki's song, for example. And in the Lion Guard, Swahili phrases are used frequently, including every member of the titular organization having a catchphrase. And so, Timon and Pumbaa lead Simba to the lush jungle valley they call home, where he subsists on bugs and decides to fully separate himself from the life he had before. For the record, lion cubs can and do subsist on insects, but when they're older, yeah, they really need more meat than you can get that way. Regardless, we see time pass. A year, perhaps? I feel like it takes longer than that for an animal as large as a lion to reach adulthood. Okay, according to Google, lions are adults at around the age of 3 and live to be about 8. So let's say some 2.5 years go by during the scene transition, as the song ends with our adult Simba, played by Matthew Broderick, though first we hear Simba's singing voice provided by Joseph Williams, a much better match for Broderick than Weaver was to Thomas. Interestingly, the first time we see adult Simba is a little more than halfway through the film. There are 47 minutes behind us and 43 to go. Probably quite a bit less than 43, considering the film has end credits, and then, this being the Disney Plus version, the credits for every dubbed version of the film currently on the platform. Most films introduce their lead actor quite a bit earlier than that, you know? Generally, when a film opens with the hero as a child, that's just a prologue, not the entire first half of the film. An unusual bit of storytelling, which I can only applaud, since it's not like there's anything about it that doesn't work. We return to the Pride Lands, which during the time skip have become a wasteland. That's some bad leadership on Scar's part. People like to joke about that, but the dialogue in these scenes makes it clear what's actually going on. There was a drought, unrelated to Scar's leadership. Maybe, I'll get back to that. With no more water in the Pride Lands, the plant life died out, and the prey animals left for, shall we say, greener pastures. Some very basic ecology. Of course, African savanna grass isn't green. They left for yellowisher pastures. How Scar's bad leadership figures into this is that having finally achieved his lifelong dream of being king of Pride Rock, he's completely unwilling to leave Pride Rock despite the drought and famine, forcing his lion and hyena subjects to stay where they are rather than follow the prey animals to a place where they may survive. Oh, and maybe merging the hyena pack with the lion pride resulted in some overhunting, but I'm still not willing to look at the hyenas as the bad guys here. Yeah, take everything I just said and amend it with maybe. Let's not forget the fact that this is a story about monarchy. The Lion King, after all, it's right there in the title. The premise of monarchy, and aristocracy in general, is that certain families who presumably became wealthy in now forgotten early human history when agriculture was first being developed, now have the divine right to rule over other people, a privilege granted them by God, or the gods, depending on where you're from, or possibly the kings of the past. You see where I'm going? It's all bullshit, of course, which is why today monarchies are all but extinct, and those that are still around don't have much in the way of actual political power. They're basically just, Kardashians. Famous for existing. Modern people love royalty, probably because they don't hold any real political office anymore. They're just there. But the fantasy genre still kind of has this weird thing for monarchy. How often in a fantasy story is the day saved by installing the true rightful heir to the throne? And this, This is technically a fantasy story, The Lion King, Talking animals aside, we do have the brief appearance by the gigantic cloudy ghost of Mufasa, and, that little bit where the wind tells Rafiki that Simba is still alive and well, so who's to say that Scar and his illegitimate claim to the throne didn't cause the drought? Note that a thunderstorm rolls in once the final battle begins, and then it starts properly raining the moment Simba defeats Scar and ascends to the throne. Monarchy, it was a thing. It was a thing nearly everywhere in the world for about 5,000 years, and most fiction has been about heroic kings. So you can hardly blame modern fiction for having difficulty, shaking the trends and conventions that have been around for the entirety of human history. When we first return to Scar after the time skip, he keeps Zazu in a cage and forces him to sing for him. The core 3 hyena lackeys bring their complaints to Scar, but he dismisses them and kicks them out. And then back to Timon, Pumbaa, and Simba for adult Simba's first speaking scene. The trio are stargazing, and they wonder what the stars are. Timon's theory is that they're fireflies who got stuck up there. In the firmament, perhaps? Ancient philosophers, before the development of proper astronomy, believed the sky to be a surface of some sort, called the firmament. Timon's theory reflects that pretty well. Pumbaa, in his simple-mindedness, has a theory of his own that's about as close to the actual truth as it's possible to get without kind of taking you out of the movie, while Simba repeats back his father's story about how they're the great kings of the past, which Timon finds a bit too amusing. I don't know if I've ever discussed the nature of stars in Keys and Kingdoms. Maybe I already have, but if so, it's been a while and it's worth a revisit. We know that in Kingdom Hearts, every star represents one of the setting's many worlds, though occasionally people speak of stars that represent individual people. In Dungeons & Dragons, the stars are world-eating abominations, or maybe they're a glimpse of the astral plane? I'm not sure. I've spent a bit too much of my time in the D&D multiverse in the much-reviled 4th edition, so there are some gaps in my knowledge. And of course in the mainstream wonderful world of Disney, when you wish upon a star, your dreams come true. So, I don't know where I'm going with this. Stars mean a lot of things to a lot of people, so maybe in Keys and Kingdoms there's a little bit of all of the above. Simba walks away and plops himself down on a pile of leaves, some of which drift off in the wind, allegedly spelling out the word sex for a brief moment, and the next day the wind takes them to Rafiki's tree, and he instantly recognizes them as a sign that Simba is alive. He modifies his painting of Simba so it has a flowing adult mane and declares, "It is time!" In the next scene, Timon and Pumbaa wander through the jungle singing "The Lion Sleeps Tonight" for no particular reason. Some people apparently think this song was written by Elton John and Tim Rice for the film. In fact, it's an adaptation of the Zulu song Mbube, written in 1939, while the popular version most people are familiar with is the 1961 English version, performed by doo-wop group The Tokens. It was their first hit single, and while they remained active until the year 2000, they were pretty much a one-hit wonder with The Lion Sleeps Tonight. The only other thing I know that group for is the Schoolhouse Rock song about gravity. They got an authentic doo-wop group for that one. Looking at a picture of The Tokens right now, bunch of white guys. That surprises me. Apparently, Lebo M did a cover of Mbube for the 2019 Lion King soundtrack. That's okay. That's an idea from a Disney live-action remake that doesn't suck. They have a few of those. Pumbaa is distracted by a beetle and follows it out into a more savanna-like region where he runs into a lioness. After being chased by her back into the jungle, Timon and Pumbaa are rescued by Simba, who recognizes the lioness from her blue eyes and distinct fighting style as Nala, adult Nala, played by Moira Kelly. Pumbaa easily forgives Nala, to Timon's alarm. Nala realizes that if Simba is alive, he's the king. Simba denies this, so Nala asks Timon and Pumbaa to give them some time alone. As Timon and Pumbaa observe for a distance, they launch into "Can You Feel the Love Tonight?" The song was originally written to be sung by Simba and Nala, and Elton John was honored to be able to write a classic Disney love ballad. He was naturally horrified when he saw a storyboard in which the entire song had been rewritten to be a comical number sung entirely by Timon and Pumbaa. The final version of the song is something of a compromise between all its previous versions. The beginning and the end are sung by Timon and Pumbaa, while the rest is performed in voiceover over scenes of Simba and Nala just bonding in silence. The chorus is performed by gospel singer Crystal Murden, with a quiet Zulu choir in the background, and a very brief glimpse into the inner thoughts of Simba and Nala, the latter having a singing voice done by Sally Dworsky. So they have something of a date in Timon and Pumbaa's oasis. Their former friendship that would have made their betrothal awkward is seemingly forgotten. Their reunion after all these years instantly turns to intimacy. Though Simba refuses to talk about where he's been all this time, and Nala knows he's hiding something, they play and have fun and eventually roll down a hill, which ends with Simba on top of Nala and her licking him and giving him what honest trailers famously called the "do-me eyes." Subtextually, I think it's pretty clear that they did indeed do it between the end of the song, in which Timon and Pumbaa weep about losing Simba, and the next scene. After the "do-me eyes, Nala finally asks Simba what's going on. He just says that he wanted to live his own life, but Nala tells him about the hyena takeover and the famine, how they need a real king to fix things. Simba refuses, telling her Hakuna Matata, and they get in a huge fight and storm away from each other. Simba rages at the sky, but soon sinks into depression, remembering that, as far as he knows, it's his fault Mufasa isn't there to look after him. Rafiki, meanwhile, has tracked down Simba and starts taunting him. Simba has apparently never met his father's old friend before and is put off by Rafiki's tricky questions and strange African chant. According to Rafiki, the chant means, "You're a baboon and I'm not," which is indeed an accurate translation of the second line of the chant. Rafiki eventually lets slip that he knows Mufasa and can show him to Simba if he follows old Rafiki deeper into the jungle. Rafiki shows Simba his own reflection in a clear pool of water, and while Simba does look an awful lot like Mufasa, it's not quite what he was hoping to see. But when Rafiki touches the surface of the pool, the reflection turns quite clearly into that of Mufasa, and Rafiki says, "He lives in you," which would become a song title in, I think it was the Lion King Broadway show before it was made into the main theme for the sequel, right? No, I'm gonna look it up on the Disney Wiki. Yes, it was in the Broadway show first. Libo M had a big hand in it, and it was also translated into Xhosa for the end credits of The Lion King 2019. Xhosa, spelled with an XH, which makes a clicking sound, is a South African language that's increased in popularity in recent years due to John Kani, the South African actor who plays Black Panther's father in the MCU, teaching it to the late Chadwick Boseman so their characters could briefly have a private conversation. A creative decision which soon evolved into Xhosa becoming the official language of the MCU's version of Wakanda. Clouds in the sky form into the shape of Mufasa's head, who chides Simba for forgetting who he is and all that he was taught. He asks him to remember, and to take his place in the circle of life. Rafiki gives Simba a very simple but vivid lecture about facing the past and learning from it, demonstrating by whacking Simba hard with his staff. The choice has been made, and Simba sets off for Pride Rock. The next morning, Nala, Timon, and Pumbaa are informed by Rafiki that Simba is on his way back home, and they set off to catch up with him. There's an epic slow-motion shot of Simba crossing the desert, which I remember best for how Lion King 1.5 made fun of it by having Pumbaa do it. Simba finds himself back in the dry, barren, and skeleton-strewn Pride Lands. His three friends catch up to him, and the four of them make their plans to take back the kingdom as storm clouds begin to gather. First, they have to get past the legions of hyenas guarding Pride Rock itself. Timon and Pumbaa creating a diversion with the famous dress and drag and do the hula routine. This 15-second scene is, well, I was going to say it's technically the film's final musical number. It's actually rather catchy with complex lyrics, but apparently it's just a lyrical adaptation of a song called simply Hawaiian War Chant, so maybe that doesn't count. After getting closer, Simba and Nala split up, Nala rallying the pride, while Simba seeks out Scar. When he gets there, Scar is interrogating Sarabi about why their hunters haven't caught anything. Being told flat out that they will die if they don't leave Pride Rock, Scar simply replies, "So be it." And when Sarabi protests, Scar strikes her, driving Simba out from his hiding place to tend to his mother. Scar is alarmed at first to see Simba, especially since he at first thinks it's Mufasa. But he quickly regains his composure, reminding the pride that the more numerous hyenas will back him if it comes down to a coup, and finally baiting Simba into confessing as to who is responsible for Mufasa's death. Simba confesses, and Scar drives him off the edge of Pride Rock just as a lightning strike starts a massive brush fire. Having Simba at his mercy, Scar can't help but whisper in Simba's ear that he actually killed Mufasa, giving Simba the second wind he needs to climb back up the cliff and pin Scar down. Simba crushes Scar's windpipe until the bastard confesses to the murder publicly, and instantly the true battle breaks out, soon joined by Timon, Pumbaa, Rafiki, and a freed Zazu. The battle includes the "Call Me Mr. Pig" moment, which I've always hated because as a kid I didn't get the reference, and apparently neither did a whole bunch of the writers of various supplemental Lion King material, as they turned the Mr. Pig thing into a very, very weak running gag for Pumbaa. Simba pursues Scar to the peak of Pride Rock as the place goes up in flames. Cornered, Scar attempts to place all the blame on the hyenas, but Simba ignores him. Scar asks how he can redeem himself, and Simba throws his own words back at him. Run away and never return. Scar feigns compliance for a moment, but instead throws some burning hot coals into Simba's face to give himself the advantage as they engage in all-out battle. The choreography for this fight, some find it difficult to take seriously, as it's modeled after the way real lions fight each other, which, as it turns out, isn't all that visually spectacular. It looks like what happens when two wimpy nerds grapple with each other. Which is kind of the case, really. Scar has gotten older, has always been scrawny, and probably hasn't been eating very well since the drought, whereas Simba hasn't been in a real fight in years and has been subsisting on insects for just as long. It's very much a wimp fight. Regardless, Simba flings Scar off the edge of Pride Rock, where he lands hard among the burning savanna grass and is approached by Shenzi, Banzai, and Ed. The trio aren't pleased by Scar's earlier throwaway line, in which he attempted to throw them under the bus, so they and the rest of their pack approach Scar and rip him to pieces. Balls first, if I recall my information about hyena hunting tactics. The moment Scar dies, it begins to rain, washing away the brush fire, and soon to bring life back to the Pride Lands. Simba returns from the crest of Pride Rock. As he passes Zazu, you can see Zazu mouth the words, "Your Majesty," but they cut out his audio because they decided this should be a silent moment. After having a proper reunion and some face nuzzling with his mother, Simba ascends to the platform thingy of Pride Rock. Not the crest, but the thing below that. It's a very well-designed location, you know, they get a lot of dramatic mileage out of it. Anyway, Simba presents himself to the Pride Lands and gives a mighty roar, which the ladies of the Pride Lands return. Now, real lions don't actually have a very impressive roar, so much like imagery of a bald eagle is often accompanied by audio of a red-tailed hawk, roaring lions in fiction are usually voiced by tigers instead. Either that or Frank Welker vocalizing into a trash can to give the roar more resonance. As a Tumblr user once so famously pointed out, real lions sound less impressive than an old man from Denver with a trash can. A man whose most famous role is Fred Jones from Scooby-Doo, the most bland and vanilla character in the history of animation, makes for a better lion than a real lion. The Tumblr user didn't say all that, they just called him some guy named Frank with a trash can, but it's an equally valid observation if you have heard of him, you know? An unknown period of time later, some of the greenery has returned to the Pride Lands, as have most of the prey animals, who are gathered once again at Pride Rock to witness the presentation of Simba and Nala's newborn cub. With Timon and Pumbaa at their side as their most trusted something or other, Rafiki presents the cub. Originally, this cub was intended to be a boy, having a character design quite similar to that of baby Simba. His name, in supplemental materials released before The Lion King 2, slips my mind, but whoever he is, I don't see him as canon anymore. The Lion King 2 retconned him into being Kiara, Simba and Nala's daughter, and therefore gave her the sleeker, more peach-colored character design of the film's female lions, instead of being scruffy and yellowish like the males. Kingdom Hearts 2, in depicting this scene in its end credits, even went with the Kiara character design instead of the one from here in the real film. Oh, and then the Lion Guard? Yeah, Kion, the main character of the Lion Guard, apparently Kiara's younger brother, whom we've never seen before. Sure, I believe he's been around the whole time. Of course, if they kill off Kion before the end of the Lion Guard to explain why he's not in the Lion King 2, I mean, that's the only ending that would make sense, right? And credits. Our directors are Roger Allers and Rob Minkoff, who don't have a whole lot of other stuff under their belts. Mostly I know Minkoff from when Honest Trailers brought him in to talk about the trailer they made for The Lion King. And he was a lot of fun. He had a lot to say and was very receptive to the Honest Trailer guys poking fun at his movie. Even took a few shots at the Walt Disney Company himself. The credits start with some African chanting and flute playing, then it moves on to Elton John's own rendition of Can You Feel the Love Tonight. As I've said before, I love reading credits of older movies and spotting names that would be important later. This was kind of the film that made me realize I like doing that. For instance, Chris Sanders, future director of Lilo and Stitch, is a production designer and in the story department. Brenda Chapman, future director of Brave, is the story supervisor. Joe Ranft is also in the story department, and Tony Fucilli was the supervising animator in charge of Mufasa. And James Baxter was in charge of Rafiki. He's most famous for being Belle's supervising animator back in Beauty and the Beast, and these days he's known for contributing his animation talents to very important moments in television cartoons. Certain scenes in Steven Universe or Gravity Falls that were simply too important to trust to the overseas animators. Most memorably, in Adventure Time, he animated and voiced a cheerful horse who rolls around on a beach ball and says nothing but, "James Baxter!" Decided to look up that character on YouTube, and he doesn't actually look that much more impressive than the normal animation on Adventure Time. Still, it's a cute tribute. And the credits end with a memorial for Frank Wells, who apparently died in '94 after being the president of the company for 10 years. Never heard of him. That's odd. I mean, I guess he wasn't a creative type. He was probably a business type, so I can see why maybe I wouldn't have. And I just glanced at the dub credits that go by after, the end of the main English version credits, and it looks like most international versions maintain Jim Cummings' performance as Ed. I know Ed doesn't talk, but surely he stands out a little when you don't dub him? Maybe not. So what can I say about The Lion King? It's where the Renaissance peaked. It's all downhill from here. Its music and art are dazzling. Its characters amazingly expressive and well written, and well acted. It's just the best. So, how long have I been talking? This is going to beat out the previous podcast as my longest one ever, isn't it? Hour and 46 minutes? Yes. The previous podcast was an hour and 49, and I'm not nearly done with this one. I don't know what I'm changing, why these movie reviews are so much longer now than they were before. I know at one point I started describing the entire plot of each movie, and that made the segment longer, but that was some time ago. I don't know what's different now. I guess I have a few tangents going into background details, but haven't I always done? Well, whatever. I don't imagine I'll have too much to say about the next film, The Santa Claus. I already talked about my ideas for having a version of Santa Claus in Cosmos last time when I did Nightmare Before Christmas. Maybe this movie can add some lore? I mean, probably not, but I figured I'd watch it in the collection. It's kind of a major Disney film, kind of a Christmas classic. Maybe. I have no idea if this film is one anybody actually likes. I've seen it a time or two, and it didn't blow me away or nothing. I'm neutral on it, never really thought about it. Gonna do that now. Think about it, that is. We open where you always find Santa Claus. The mall. The toy store is celebrating a nice profitable year thanks to their new toy, and we meet our main character, Scott, played by Tim Allen. Tim Allen does a lot of schlocky comedies like this, doesn't have a lot of truly good material to his name. He'll tell you it's because conservatives don't get a lot of opportunities in Hollywood. Yeah, I'll say they don't. They say that these days it's easier to come out as gay than it is to come out as conservative. I should hope so. You know why? Because there's nothing wrong with being gay. Alright, I'm not going to harp on Tim Allen's politics too much. As Hollywood conservatives go, he seems fairly harmless. Scott drives home as the opening credits roll to the music of The Carol of the Bells. That one. Where he reunites with his son Charlie, played by Eric Lloyd. Like most protagonists of heartwarming family comedies, Scott is a divorced man who has minimal custody of his young son. Scott learns from his ex-wife Laura, played by Wendy Crewson, that Charlie was told at school that there is no Santa Claus, and Laura's new hubby Neil, played by Judge Reinhold, decided to tell him the truth. Scott is annoyed that he wasn't made part of that. I said this just one episode ago, but it bears repeating. In universes where Santa Claus exists but adults don't believe in him, how do the world's adults rationalize the gifts that actually come from Santa? The movie I've seen that comes closest to explaining this is Elf, a true Christmas classic. When Santa explains to Buddy that most people believe the kid's parents bring the presents from Santa and eat the milk and cookies, Buddy expresses disbelief that parents could do that all in one night. It's a nice reversal, sorta kinda lampshading, but nowhere near an answer. I'm not sure why I said it was the nearest thing to an answer. Back to this movie. Scott burns Christmas dinner, so they go out driving, searching for a place to eat that's open on Christmas Eve, and they end up in a Denny's, surrounded by Japanese businessmen, Jewish families, numerous other single dads who burnt the turkeys, and not a whole lot on the menu anymore. Later that night, Scott reads Charlie to sleep with the classic poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." Charlie famously mishearing the line, "There arose such a clatter," as "there a rose such a ladder," and asking what kind of ladder that is. Charlie has a lot of questions about Christmas lore, how reindeer fly, how Santa fits down chimneys, how he gets into houses when not everybody has a fireplace anymore. Scott tries to convince Charlie that sometimes he just needs to have faith. Charlie is on the fence enough to request that Scott leave out milk and cookies. That night, Santa Claus himself sets down on Scott's roof. Charlie and Scott hear the clattering up above, and alarmed, Scott goes to investigate. He calls out to Santa, who is startled and slips, falling off of Scott's roof and dying on impact with the ground. You really couldn't have come up with a better catalyst for your magical Christmas plot than having your protagonist manslaughter Santa Claus? Desperately hoping the man is still alive, Scott searches Santa's pockets for identification, finding only a business card, one side reading simply, "Santa Claus," and the other, "If something should happen to me, put on my suit. The reindeer will know what to do." Only then do Scott and Charlie realize that the reindeer-drawn sleigh is on Scott's roof. As they gawk at it, Santa twitches one final time before his body fades away like a Jedi, leaving only his suit. Charlie finds there's suddenly a ladder on the side of the house that wasn't there before, made remarkably by the Rose Suchek Ladder Company. There really is a Rose Suchek ladder. Charlie climbs up on the roof to investigate, and as Scott tries to stop him, he inadvertently sets the team of reindeer on to continue their rounds. Oy, those are some shoddy CGI reindeer in the flying scenes here. They get to the next house, and Charlie persuades Scott to put on the Santa suit and finish Santa's deliveries. Scott does so, discovering as he works that Santa's sack is usually empty, containing only the toys to be dropped off at this particular house, and that when a house doesn't have a chimney and fireplace, one magically appears. Scott finishes Santa's deliveries over the course of, must feel to him like a few billion minutes, considering how long it takes him during what deliveries we see. That time dilation must be a hell of a pain in the ass, but by the end of the night, Scott admits he's having a pretty good time. The reindeer bring them back to the North Pole, where they come upon the elves' workshop. I remember it being fairly memorable how this movie handles its Christmas elves. Most movies use actors with dwarfism, while bigger budget productions, such as, again, the movie Elf, use actors who are fairly short and then use special effects to make them half the size of the human characters. This movie uses children, and while it's acknowledged that they look like children, they also mention being over 1,000 years old and being in adult relationships. The elf in charge is Bernard, played rather incongruously by a 16-year-old David Krumholtz. I don't know why they made their lead elf look and sound much older than the others. Kind of weird, but whatever. He is a better actor than the other elves because he's older, so yeah. Bernard greets Scott as the new Santa, ignoring most of his protests and only eventually explaining that, by putting on the suit as the business card asked, Scott agreed to a legally binding contract, specifically the Santa clause of this contract. Haha. The clause is in very fine print around the edges of the business card and states that he who wears the suit and enters the sleigh agrees to sacrifice his previous life and identity and become the new Santa Claus. Bernard tells Scott he has 11 months to sort out his life, and then he's due at the North Pole in Thanksgiving to assume Santa's duties and responsibilities. Scott and Charlie get some sleep in Santa's bedroom, and not one single elf seems for 1 second that they mourn the death of the previous Santa Claus. Well, maybe they knew about it the moment it happened, and they experience time the same way Santa does, and this evening has taken a few billion minutes to go by for them as well. 1 billion minutes being nearly 2,000 years, for context. That's thinking a bit too hard, don't you think, for me to get to there? Anyway, I question this film's writers for not thinking very hard about their Christmas story starts with the brutal manslaughter of Santa Claus. A Punch and Judy puppet show is being performed in Santa's bedroom. I've heard that name before, Punch and Judy. Guess I always assumed it was some kind of 1950s sitcom, but I decided to look it up. Apparently, it is in fact a traditional puppet show dating back to the 16th century. That's wild. I had no idea. That puppet character you always see who has a long nose and a big chin and carries a big stick that he hits the other puppet with, apparently that's Mr. Punch. Wild. I had absolutely no idea that that's always meant to be the same character every time. I thought it was a generic Renaissance era puppet show trope. Neat. Scott wakes up on Christmas morning in his own bed. Having put on a few pounds and still wearing the Santa-themed pajamas he was given, he regardless decides that last night was all a crazy dream, which he somehow shared with Charlie. Laura returns to pick up Charlie, who tells her the whole story, much to Scott's confusion. Cut to what appears to be career day at Charlie's school. That's an awfully quick edit for what's surely at least a couple of weeks later, right? After vacation? Kinda jarring. Charlie's teacher asks him to introduce Neil, who's a psychologist, but Charlie wants Scott to go first. Scott hopes to talk about his job at the toy company, but no, Charlie wants to talk about how his dad is Santa Claus. Charlie's 3 parental units are eventually brought into the principal's office to discuss the seriousness of just how strongly Charlie believes this story. In weeks to come, Scott tries to convince Charlie that this was all a dream, but Charlie produces the magic snow globe he was given by Bernard, which doesn't seem to do anything magic. This scene has a nice clever backdrop, the underwater viewing area of the polar bear exhibit at the zoo. Nice touch. This is interesting. Neil tries to out-logic Charlie about all this Santa stuff, starting with visiting all the children of the world. Charlie's answer isn't just about the sleigh existing in what he calls a time continuum, but also that not everyone in the world celebrates Christmas. That's true. Nice touch. Eventually, Scott, not wanting to completely crush Charlie's new Santa Claus obsession, asks Charlie to keep it a secret from now on, which Charlie accepts. But then one morning, Scott wakes up to find he's become exceptionally rotund and grown an unusual amount of silvery facial hair. He shaves, but finds his clothes don't fit, so he has to come to work in a sweatsuit and finds at lunchtime that he's developed a bit of a sweet tooth, as in he orders all the desserts. And then when his co-workers start pitching their ideas for next year's Christmas toys, he finds himself strangely passionate about what Santa would or would not do in a TV ad, and just what kind of toys they should be selling. His boss, Mr. Whittle, played by Peter Boyle in what's basically a cameo, takes him out for a private word and encourages him to go see a psychiatrist and a dietitian. So Scott visits a doctor. By this point, he's gained 45 pounds and has bushy silver hair and beard, and no amount of exercising or shaving can get rid of it, though the constant diet of milk and cookies is surely a factor. At the end of this scene, the doctor listens to Scott's heartbeat, which hammers out the melody of Jingle Bells. As more time goes by, Scott finds that he has to actively avoid kids coming to him and sitting on his lap to tell him what they want for Christmas. Laura thinks Scott is deliberately putting on this Santa act in order to appeal to Charlie's obsession with the big guy. Later, Scott receives a shipment of the Naughty and Nice list. A list of everyone in the world, which, as you would expect, takes up a couple dozen boxes. A note from Bernard tells him to check it twice. The list, I will say the list gives us a very memorably bad joke. Apparently, the list is alphabetized by initials, and then from there is completely random. So the first page is a randomized list of people with the initials AA, purely so Scott can remark in surprise about how Armand Asante is on the list. That's a stretch. That's stretching for a joke, that is. The timeline of the movie is very difficult to pin down. I guess nearly a year has passed because our next scene has Scott walking down a street covered in autumn leaves. He intuitively knows the name of everyone he sees, child or adult, and whether they're naughty or nice. Later, his last attempt at shaving and dyeing his hair results in it coming back, pure white and thicker than ever, right before his eyes in glorious 1994 CGI. Laura and Neil are considering taking away Scott's visitation rights on account of his apparent delusions. While Charlie discusses things privately with the judge, Laura and Neil talk about the day they stopped believing in Santa. For both of them, it was on a Christmas morning when they didn't get the exact brand name thing they wanted. Okay, so they're both shallow. Is that what I was supposed to take away from that? Scott shows up late just as Charlie emerges and assures Scott he told the judge everything. Uh-oh. Sure enough, the judge suspends Scott's visitation rights until a hearing on the first of the new year, which is Soon, the judge also mentions that it's the holiday season. You kind of have an editing problem in your film when it comes as a shock that nearly a year has passed. Charlie is devastated, and obviously so is Scott. Sometime later, who the heck knows how much time, Scott comes to Laura's house even though he's not supposed to, and Charlie gives him the magic snow globe. And for the first time, Scott can see the magic pictures swirling around within it. Finally convinced that his trip to the North Pole last year really did happen, Scott knows what he must do. Bernard materializes in the house, and the three of them head off on their way, Scott apparently going back on what he said a moment ago about it being best for Charlie to stay with his mom while they do the Santa thing. So the police are assembled to find a delusional dad who kidnapped his kid. Back at the North Pole, the elves are getting the sleigh ready, complete with new high-tech upgrades of Charlie's suggestion, though Scott nervously asks a few times what happens if he falls off a roof, and gets no answer. Seriously, who was that last guy, and why does nobody care? Maybe he was a really mean Santa, I don't know. So, while the police search the streets for a guy dressed in a Santa suit, Scott, now wearing the Santa suit and his snow-white beard reaching the middle of his chest, goes on his rounds, accompanied by Charlie all the while. Sarah, a little girl who sleeps by her Christmas tree and saw him the previous year, compliments him on how much better he looks the part this time. When Scott drops off presents at Neil and Laura's house, he's apprehended by the police. With Charlie stranded on the roof and the elves having lost contact with their new Santa... Seriously, why weren't they concerned when their last guy died? I just don't freaking get it. They employ ELFS, the Effective Liberating Fighting Squad. Too obvious it was called that just for the acronym. This squadron of elves with jetpacks head to the house to get Charlie off the roof and then go save Santa. Note to self, jetpacks. When I did The Rocketeer, a movie all about a jetpack, I associated it more with Iron Man armor, but jetpacks are important too. Charlie and ELFS spring Santa/Scott from jail and bring him back home. Laura and Neil are relieved to see Charlie, less so to see Scott in full Santa regalia. Scott redecides that Charlie should stay with his mom. You already decided that earlier and then unexpectedly went back on it. I chide them, but now that I'm very slowly starting to produce media entertainment myself, I know how damn hard it is to keep track of every little detail. I can let it go. Laura somehow realizes that Scott really is Santa Claus. No doubt some combination of it being Christmas Eve and Scott not trying to fight it anymore and being there in all his Father Christmassy glory just makes it undeniable when you look upon him. And she brings him a gift, their old custody agreement, which she throws in the fireplace, telling him she wants him to have his fair share of time with Charlie. Neil is initially resistant to all of this, but upon giving Scott some close inspection, his heart melts, and he too realizes he's looking upon the real Santa, though he continues to be in denial of it for a few more minutes. Bernard, once again coming out of nowhere here in this house, reveals to Charlie that if he shakes the magic snow globe, he'll be able to contact his dad again, and his dad, being Santa Claus, can be there for him instantaneously. That would have been a good plot device to have earlier, only it wouldn't if it wouldn't have been needed, because Scott doesn't go to live at the North Pole until the end of the film. Well, I hope Charlie makes use of that snow globe in the sequels, because otherwise what was even the point of mentioning it? I like it in principle, though. It's a very interesting twist on scrying. Not only is it a magic crystal ball for keeping in touch, when one of the participants is Santa, then of course it's also a good way to instantly summon him to your side. Very cool. The police and many neighborhood kids and other gawkers watch in awe as Santa's sleigh takes off from the roof of Laura's house and disappears into the night sky, as Scott crows, "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night," then sending down the individual gifts to all the onlookers on tiny parachutes, including the board game Laura wanted and the whistle Neil wanted back when they were little. The elves hidden in the crowd of onlooking children disappear and go back to their business. 10 minutes later, doubtless much longer from Scott's perspective, he returns to give Charlie a little spin in the sleigh, and our film ends as they pass over the moon. The credits roll over, guess what? A very cheesy 90s pop song, because of course they do. This movie was so timeless up until that point, but these 90s Disney films just have to suddenly blast us with 90s-ness as soon as the credits start rolling, don't they? It was doing so well. Even when there was a preparation montage near the end of the film there, that song wasn't at all too 90s, but this one, yeah. So I'd just like to briefly mention this film's two sequels. The Santa Claus 2 is about discovering that there's another clause in the contract, the Mrs. Clause. Haha. Scott discovers that he has to have a wife before next Christmas if he is to remain Santa, so he has a very short period of time to meet someone and forge a romantic bond. Yeah, question, another of many, about Scott's dead predecessor in the role of Santa. What happened to his wife after Scott caused his violent death? And in the Santa Claus 3, the escape clause, Martin Short joins the cast as Jack Frost. I don't know the actual plot, but I assume Jack Frost has a villainous or at least antagonistic role. I'm mentioning the sequels because they're not in the collection. I didn't think they were important enough to actually watch, but I thought what I know about their premises was worth mentioning for Keys and Kingdoms segment purposes. I also know one other thing about the sequels, that regarding the character of Comet. Here in the first movie, Comet was the most prominent of Santa's reindeer, being occasionally depicted with an animatronic head that gave Scott some side-eye every now and then, and was the subject of a single fart joke. In the sequels, Comet is CGI and much more expressive, can actually talk in a voice that sounds a bit like Scooby-Doo, and is the subject of many more fart jokes. Sounds god-awful. Okay. Just want to give myself a reminder rundown what the Santa Claus can do for K&K. There are bits and pieces of Santa Claus lore here I can convert to the grittier Bishop version. I particularly want to remember magic flying reindeer. I know those are, inseparable from Santa, but I've never remembered them before when thinking about the K&K version of Santa Claus, so mentioning them now so I don't forget again. Then, as far as this film's depiction of elves, I do like the idea of a race whose adult form looks almost exactly like a human child. Thing is, when I conceive of a new creature, I think about everything about them, from their biology to their sex lives. And the sex lives of people who look exactly like small human children, nobody wants to think about that. Maybe if they're some sort of fey creature and therefore don't reproduce in the normal biological way. Yeah, maybe that'll work. And their romantic lives, mentioned in a throwaway joke here and there in the movie, can be purely emotional, puppy love, like when 5th graders date. I can work with that. I generally want the universe of Keys and Kingdoms to be a very sexy place, but it doesn't have to be that way all the time for everyone, yeah?
I'm back. It's been over 3 weeks since I recorded what you just listened to. Sorry, just stuff happened. Did I miss the second anniversary of the channel? Shit, I did. That was November 14th. And I'm very sorry if the audio is suddenly very different. It seems that in that 3-week interim, my Blue Yeti microphone I've had for 3 years is nearing the end of its lifespan. Last 2 videos I made sound awfully quiet and muffled, and nothing I did could improve the gain. So I made a judgment call. My laptop's onboard mic will serve better than the recently deceased Yeti until a new, much cheaper microphone arrives in the mail. Can't afford to invest in another good one right now. So I hope the $30 model, about $200 cheaper than a replacement Yeti, will suffice and be, non-stupid. Okie dokie then, here's 2 things I haven't done in a very long time. Recapping the K&K lore found in the last batch of films I watched, and collecting the next batch. I'm excited. Yeah, all this K&K lore I've been collecting from these movies, I have my doubts if I've ever once incorporated a single one of them into the choices or any other Keys and Kingdoms story I've been writing. I really need to get around to doing that. It's just, I struggle with thinking of how any piece of world building could ever possibly be relevant to a story. No, if I ever cared one lick about the setting in any story I've ever written, I only care about the characters and the plot. As I've observed from reading my own fanfiction, there was a time when I never indicated where a story was set, at all, so I'm aware now that a story needs a world, but I have zero clue of how to incorporate one. I'm working on it. So here's the page on the slideshow thingy I just finished for your viewing pleasure. The Disney Renaissance, Part 2 of 5, covering 1993 and 1994. Homeward Bound: The Incredible Journey. As far as the wildlife theme, I'm intrigued by this film's interpretation, that animals can't understand human speech and the resulting confusion and fear. The way animals think, why a dog is man's best friend, the truth of domestication. See, what the process of domestication really does is reduce animals to an infantile state all their lives. Barking, wagging tails, meowing, purring. Wolves and wildcats don't do that as adults, but the populations our ancestors bred into being the dogs and cats we know today, well, that's why they depend on humans, isn't it? Because mentally they're stuck as children all their lives. And, some game development stuff, river crossing obstacles with inevitable waterfalls, catapult flinging, lost children, and the comical antics of American wildlife such as raccoons, skunks, and porcupines. Hocus Pocus led me to the conclusion that what fairy tales call witches, naturally those are the malevolent fey beings more accurately known as hags. They come in covens of 3, not unlike the Sanderson sisters, and maybe do so because each hag has a unique power. So what is the definition of a witch in K&K? I guess just any woman who uses any sort of magic, maybe just arcane magic. Witchy imagery, the cabin in the woods, the purple smoke, the scary book with the living eyeball, the candle with the black flame, good stuff. Youth potions, virginity-related magical components, a curse of immortality. I talked about how that doesn't work in a game setting because an RPG needs both risk and potential victory, meaning neither heroes nor villains should be cursed with invincibility, but then again, Binks does get killed at one point in the film. He just comes back instantly. There are plenty of D&D monsters who, when they die, in not a certain way, they come back later. So yeah, take out the instant resurrection, and there you go. Magic features, such as certain creatures being unable to enter certain areas with loopholes, such as flying over it, witch circles drawn on the ground for spells, and, surprised I haven't thought of this earlier, the fact that when an evil spellcaster dies in a Disney film, all their spells are instantly undone. We should figure out when in this magic system that does or does not apply. Holidays in the K&K universe based on those in real life, starting with the autumn night of frivolity and dressing up in costumes. Let's think of some others, including those exclusive to particular countries, and a few that apply only to modern settings, using modern technology to trick people from the past about stuff, and which is riding on more modern cleaning tools. You know what I like? Swiffers. The Nightmare Before Christmas easily beats out The Little Mermaid as the most idea-filled film I've covered so far. I may have to divide it up into sections. Nightmare Before Christmas, let's start with locations. We have several interdimensional towns with holiday motifs. Maybe there are 4 towns in the Feywild based on the 4 seasons. While Halloween Town, its setting seems more like the Shadowfell. It is reachable via any graveyard, after all. Incidentally, I can't call them the Feywild and the Shadowfell anymore. They need new names, even if they are totally the Feywild and the Shadowfell. Halloween Town, with its sun like a jack-o'-lantern and shadowy moon, that reminded me of something from my D&D campaign, that every world has a different sky. So I think Cosmos itself has a sky exactly like the one here on Earth, maybe with a bigger sun and moon, since that's common in animation. But when you head to the Feywild, the Shadowfell, any of the celestial realms, you get a different alien sky. Neat, huh? And now, creatures and characters. The denizens of Halloween Town, yeah, the background ones. There are plenty of traditional monsters there, and some unique ones. I should compile a list of them all and implement them. Apart from vampires, werewolves, and witches, we have lagoon creatures, the man under the bed, the hanging tree, and especially my main man, the Harlequin demon. As I mentioned, I gave Jack the title the White Lich of the Curly Hill, and that's a Kingdom Butts idea, but it could be a plurality, both the guy and the hill. And my note, sorcerers can totally be liches. So sentient living ragdolls a la Sally, who have premonitions, apparently. As for Zero, I like ghost dogs. I recently did a quick skim of a favorite childhood book, The Element Encyclopedia of Magical Creatures, and discovered that there are a huge amount of magical creatures in all sorts of cultures that are essentially huge black ghost dogs with glowing eyes that haunt roads and stuff. So maybe they have that instead of Zero's glowing pumpkin nose. Another strangely common creature around the world, carnivorous horses that live underwater and drown people. Strange thing, huh? So ghost dogs, maybe we take that moment at the end. Maybe a ghost dog can ascend once they've proven themselves a good dog. Yeah, that's too easy. It's a ghost dog, not a good dog. And there was my idea that the more human-seeming residents, such as the mayor and the doctor, are Shadarkai with extreme body modifications. The trademark-friendly version of Shadarkai are called Shadow Folk, but I think we can come up with something better. Too many names end in folk, you know? Santa Claus. As a character in K&K is a bishop, a monk who fights with a candy cane staff. He owns a massive factory which employs elves of the high fantasy variety. What exactly does this factory do? We know he's pals with Jesus, who's an obscure minor demigod in this world. And maybe Santa has a lobster motif as erroneously assigned to him by the Halloween townies in this film. The trio of trick-or-treaters, clearly they're not just kids in costumes. Let's think about them a bit. Other characters, Oogie Boogie, we know he's not unlike a larva mage, or what they call the worm that walks. He's interdimensional, possibly aberrant, or maybe more shadowy, but he relies more on death traps than physical combat. Ridiculously unlucky, fueled by the diminishing returns of an addiction, a cannibal with a breath-sucking ability, and black lights. The Easter Bunny, man-sized. Anything like the Hugh Jackman version of the Easter Bunny, or would that be too on the nose? The Igors who assist mad scientists, maybe there's some sort of cast or creation. There's a 2008 animated movie on that subject. I talked a bit about Universal horror films, and I had the thought, what's worth studying? Dracula and Frankenstein, the original books which have never been faithfully adapted into another medium. All we know about them are based on the 1930s Universal versions. Undead Reindeer, the Killer Christmas Wreath, the Tree-Eating Snake, and I think that's it for creatures. And another segment, how's about objects? Dr. Finkelstein uses a wheelchair, and there was recently a really cool homebrew thing that made a big splash in the D&D world, the combat wheelchair. A way for wheelchair-using people in the D&D world to adventure just like everybody else. So I certainly don't want to overlook the disabled in K&K. Let's think about that. And the severed head of Tim Burton. Should that just be something that appears in some background artwork, or should there actually be a magic item called severed head of Tim Burton? That would be funny. And frog's breath. I didn't mention this in the review, but frog's breath is an ingredient Sally uses in Dr. Finkelstein's food. I pronounced it two different ways. To mask the smell of the poisons she mixes in, and the ingredient we see has her open a can, revealing a frog which exhales all over the food. I think that would be a fun little shout-out. And finally, story elements. With my discarding the idea that K&K works under 5th edition D&D rules, well, that opened up some possibilities about interworld travel, and Kingdom Butts being a much less difficult story element to work with. What I have to remember is that interworld travel is never a triviality just because the heroes do it. Heroes also have hundreds of gold pieces and unimaginably powerful weapons and abilities. A cool character dynamic being wanting to be someone's lover, but feeling that you don't have a shot, and being generally cool with being a good friend. And this isn't necessarily a K&K idea, but military and police involvement in Santa Claus stories, adults treating him with the gravitas he deserves. The Three Musketeers, doodly-doo, evil torchlit catacombs with waterways, musketeer uniforms, swashbuckling heroes. Would musketeers not also wield muskets? Windmills are a fun set piece, chandelier stuff, that's a swashbuckling classic, just anything involving a chandelier. Battle gadgetry, such as three-headed blade-breaking daggers, bolas, wenching lessons, with the wenches totally in on, of course, cannons and fortress thingies, a servant bathing the queen and having girl talk. That's a cute scene. Exotic foreign mercenaries, mixing up action scenes by including one such character among groups of normal mooks. Snipers? Can you really snipe with 17th century guns? I like how the cardinal was packing a gun under all those robes, and how the guy he shot was then saved by a crucifix. Iron Maidens. Battling dungeon keepers and torturers is an interesting set piece, and overall the strong protecting the weak, being there for the little guy, good motif that we need right now. The return of Jafar. So, uplifted animals, the kind of animal that can talk and operate at a fully human level. I'm thinking that's a mid-level piece of magic, so they're rare, they're around. Instead of robbing the rich to feed the poor, maybe robbing thieves who rob the rich and then give that to the poor. It's new. That bejeweled flower from early in the film, it's cool. Maybe it's like a wand? Surviving a battle with no arms or equipment, just wits in the environment, that's a roguish ability for sure. We see in this film that an imprisoned genie is physically incapable of moving too far from his lamp's position. If a creature is magically incapable of killing, well, you'd be surprised what you can live through, so thinking of some game rules for that. The subject of chancellors and viziers and when they are reliable or not. So, nightmares, referring to evil, fiendish horses. Do they fly? Do they have wings? A villain who wants his enemy to die without hope. Executioners. A lake of lava battle, and the notion that if you destroy the lamp, you destroy the genie, which probably isn't easy. You probably need something as crazy destructive as a lake of lava. Imprisoning a genie in a glass orb, and that crazy instantaneous rescue thing Genie did near the end, that was awesome. I'm thinking super speed mechanics. I was already considering those for wood elves, super speedy instead of merely speedy. The Lion King. Revisiting the themes, the social structure and the wildlife theme, as seen in both Bambi and here. What even is a king's job in such a setting? Surely there are cultural aspects, like the funeral rites of an elephant. As for predators being in charge, apparently my conclusion in my Kingdom Hearts fanfic was just that everyone knows that's the way nature works. The monkey character in wildlife being the one to possess magic and technology. The hyenas here are second-class citizens willing to riot for their basic civil rights. Let's examine how such people are demonized, as they often are. Royal inbreeding, where it isn't a big deal. Savannah watering hole. Use of a musical sequence as a plan. Scrubland geysers make for a good hazard and a good villainous atmosphere. Stampede event, succession stories, that's fantasy standard. Is it possible we could be a bit less pro-monarchy than most fantasy, or go in entirely the other direction and legitimize monarchy by making the right or wrong king have an effect on the weather? I don't know. Shakespearean motifs and, remember gay men, would you? Firmament? What exactly is the sky like in Cosmos? Is it a firmament? Revisit the stars idea, what stars are like in D&D, Kingdom Hearts, and Disney as a whole. Ancestor consultation, something I thought about when designing the part of Cosmos based on China, happens here too. And dirty battle tactics like flinging hot coals. And final movie, The Santa Claus, an ancient fey race that resemble human children. Innocent people, but unimaginably wise and savvy, and non-sexual, but then how do they get new members of their people? Well, they're fey, so there are options. Maybe kind of a Thumbelina thing. Go back to that. So how do we make Santa Claus a badass? Maybe he can freeze time, slow it, rewind it a few seconds if need be. Maybe he has a battle sled like the Chitauri, though not self-propelled. I keep forgetting the flying reindeer. It's got to be quite a bit different from just ordinary caribou, yeah? Keep in mind the premises of the movie sequels. Mrs. Claus is his wife, and Jack Frost is some sort of fae. And finally, Punch and Judy. Maybe as actual people, not just puppets. And also, only a few short days after I said that Tim Allen seems fairly harmless as far as Hollywood conservatives go, he went and encouraged his followers to look up Marxism and the Communist Manifesto, so evidently he thinks Biden, his president-elect, is a communist. What a fucking dope. Okay, and TV series on this page. Gargoyles, I recorded retrospectives for those nearly a year ago. I've just fallen hella behind on watching the Little Mermaid TV series. Gotta get back to that as soon as I possibly can. As of this recording, I finished one yesterday, and it'll premiere in a couple of hours. As for the Aladdin TV series, gonna have to skip over it for now. Gonna jump straight from Gargoyles to the Hercules TV series, and, see what the Disney Plus status is of the Aladdin and Tarzan shows once the collection is over. Alright, now to acquire the next batch of movies in the collection, the films of 1995 and 96. They're all on Disney Plus. That was easy, and I'm pretty sure I won't get blindsided like I was with Homeward Bound. It was coming soon to Disney Plus because another streaming service still had the rights to it, but I'm pretty sure that by this point, all of those contracts have expired, and Disney Plus has all the stuff they ever intended to have. So, all this talking I've been doing, I had to stop a few times to rest my throat. Tried to have tea. I picked peach ginger tea because it had ginger, but if current trends continue, I'm probably going to have to get into the habit of making honey lemon ginger tea, which I always have on hand when I'm acting in a play, and it seems the podcast is going to start requiring it as well. So, segment 2 of 2, I guess. A bit lopsided. Well, we're back to my Maximum Ride fanfiction, now beginning book 2 of the 6-book series. Second book called In My Absence. An experiment in telling a Maximum Ride story, which Max isn't in. How about that? Much, much shorter than the first book, only 16 chapters to the first book's 40. So today, we'll cover half of it. Chapter 1 retells most of the final chapter of the ICBG, but from Max's perspective instead of Fang's. I kind of dig what I did there, showing the moment where Max left first from Fang's perspective, then Max's, even though this story is mostly Fang's, and we get a lot of inner thoughts from Max that keep the scene interesting, as well as giving a small recap of the first story. That's pretty well done. Well done technically, yeah. As Max flies off, she's not sure where she's going, just away. The voice assures her she's doing the right thing in prioritizing her daughter, and Max narrates that this book isn't her story, it's Fang's. Fang, she says, was there for it. I'm willing to bet there is no it. I'm sure I was foreshadowing absolutely nothing, but I could be wrong. I don't really remember how this story goes. Let's find out. Chapter 2, we flip over to Fang's perspective, where we'll be for most of the story. He asks Angel what happens next. It's established here better, I assume, than it was in the first story, that Angel has developed a certain clairvoyance, just some knowledge of the future, and that Max exclusively refers to this power as the ability to foretell shit. Pretty sure that'll be a gag again once or twice. Angel says she can't really get a good perspective on the future when the six of them are all together, and she knows she'll have to figure that out if they're never going to see Iggy or Nudge again. Gazzy, meanwhile, has decided that he gives up on life, and this is for sure a moment I'd love to do again in a new thing. His speech is really good there. Fang manages to persuade Gazzy not to give up. Iggy was his mentor and would want his teachings to live on in Gazzy. And so, with only 3 of them left, they start planning, only for Jewel to pop up out of nowhere. Bridget is with him, and a silent exchange between Angel and Fang confirms that even though Jewel is a robot, Angel can read his mind. Fang notes that for later and surrenders to Jewel, knowing they're no match for him in a fight. Chapter 3, the 3 remaining flockers are sedated and they awaken in a stone cell. The stone walls are breathing, to Fang's horror, and Bridget alone is guarding them. Bridget explains that the cell is of genetically engineered stone, which Fang protests makes absolutely no sense. Stone doesn't have genetics. I do intend to visit seemingly nonsensical concepts, including this one, in Iris. Iris is eventually going to start using a lot of concepts from this fic, and it will be acknowledged that there are a lot of things in the world that you can't explain and even seem self-contradictory. That'll be more of a motif in Iris, since it's not set in our modern world. It's set in a very distant future where things are quite different. But about the stuff about the stone, that's not the information Fang's after. He wants to know what Bridget's doing on the bad guy's side. Bridget apologizes, admitting first that she's fallen in love with Fang. I don't remember exactly how old Bridget is, but pretty sure she has a doctorate, and Fang is 14. Max in the books assumes Bridget has a thing for Fang and vice versa due to a knee-jerk mistrust of redheads after Fang's first love interest. So my interpretation in this fic was that, yes, Bridget was unstable enough that she really did fall for Fang, and Fang was oblivious until just now when she says it outright, and he's revolted. Point being, Fang wants to know her motivation, and she replies that the answer is blowing in the wind. Awful shit is happening in the world, and she wants to live through it, so she's siding with Jewel. Going with the side that'll keep her alive, and yeah, what a twist of a Bob Dylan quote, yeah. So, Fang ponders the nature of this living stone holding cell. He talks about it, and it clearly understands every word he says and has emotional reactions to it, even though Bridget says that to her knowledge it doesn't have that kind of intelligence. Fang butters up Bridget a bit and asks her to tell him a story about her life. She does, and, once she's way into it, it causes the bars of the cell to break apart in a gaping yawn. The 3 of them barrel out and escape out into the wherever they are, it doesn't say. So yes, breaking out of a living jail cell by forcing someone to tell a boring story until the cell yawns. That was stolen from a Myth Adventures book. I talked about Myth Adventures last time, and it made a lot more sense there because it was a magic cell shaped like the head of a dragon and designed to contain vampires, to swallow or inhale them when they try to escape. And the prisoner, the character telling the boring story, was well established in previous books as having hundreds of years of dull stories to tell. I liked what this chapter did for the characters of Fang and Bridget in the fanfic. It developed them and established them a bit, but as far as the introduction of the character who would later come to be identified as the Living Cell, not a great introduction. It didn't make much sense and was, completely ripped off from a Myth Adventures scene. However, the Living Cell would return later in the saga, much later if I remember correctly, and get up to some less derivative stuff. Though the only thing I remember him doing at this moment is a statement he makes during the final battle of the story, but he definitely comes back at least a little bit earlier than that. Chapter 4 opens with a message from me about how this chapter ends with a cliffhanger, a fun one, and apparently my aim with that message was to assure the reviewers that I'd been planning that cliffhanger from the very beginning of the story without any influence from what they wanted to see happen. I suppose a more secure author wouldn't say such things. So they're in Jules' base, not described in the slightest, of course. They sneak some uniforms from a closet, classic maneuver. Let's see how it works out for them. And there is a description of the location. Fang says it resembles a research facility or perhaps a hospital, which triggers PTSD flashbacks in him because, grew up as a lab subject. And Fang realizes to his horror that somehow Jewel has enough people, around 10,000 in the base, that this disguising themselves as guards thing will probably work, but, still, Jewel's got a lot of power behind him. 2 guards accost them anyway and guide them into a small room. The guards wonder if Fang really is a soldier of Jewel and ask him to prove it, displaying what Jewel's soldiers are capable of by throwing some darts, each one flawlessly spearing a bug in the room. Fang realizes that the soldier is just messing with him, and the guy pushes a button on his helmet that lifts his holographic disguise. He's actually Iggy. Chapter 5. Naturally, the other one is Nudge, and I was going to bring something up here, but apparently it wasn't in this scene. I must have come up with it later for an equivalent Iris scene, but the idea is, in addition to a hologram that disguises you as someone else, someone of the same height and build as yourself, just with variations in color and the slightest modifications to your face, also a voice changer. I wanted the voice changer to be kind of visceral, in that you need to implant it right into the back of your throat, Want to come up with a cool moment where before someone drops the disguise, they remove the voice-changing device from inside their mouth, deep inside their mouth, and it's really creepy. I thought that whole thing originated from this story, but I guess not. I guess I added the details later. And so, when Fang is emotionally overwhelmed by the discovery that Iggy and Nudge are alive, the two of them go, "We got Fang to cry, we got Fang to cry." That's funny. Iggy explains that they were rescued by what remains of the ICBG, Danny and Ray and Ram. They speed healed them and gave them disguises. Speed healing comes up a lot in this story, but I don't think I ever actually explain it. I guess I just assumed it was ubiquitous in science fiction, but the premise is that it accelerates the regeneration of your cells so you heal from injuries super fast. I suppose logically, such an accelerator would also make you older whilst healing you, so there's risks there. It wouldn't be as easy a decision to just hop in an accelerator as it is throughout this fanfic. The 5 of them ditch Jules' compound. How they do that without being spotted leaving, I don't know. Fang explains to Iggy and Nudge where Max went, and Iggy has a mild panic attack over it, but quickly kind of comes to his senses. It's explained that Jules' base is in Libya, and the ICBG have set up a new secret base in nearby Italy. Where either organization attained the resources to actually build shit, I guess pure genius on the part of what remains of the ICBG. Also, during this conversation, Iggy and Nudge mentioned that while recovering from their injuries, they had sex. I kept saying I was going to address that. The romance between 14-year-old Iggy and 11-year-old Nudge. Yeah, I was going to address that at this point when the relationship becomes sexual. A misstep, I'm totally super aware of that. Let me explain. This fic was published in late 2009, so I was 17. I hadn't had any contact with any 11-year-olds since I myself was 11. And what I remembered about being 11 was being very interested in sex and very attracted to my fellow 11-year-olds. And you know how it works. When you're a certain age, everyone your age looks normal. So in my memories, 11-year-olds were indistinguishable from 17-year-olds, so I thought nothing of writing an 11-year-old as a highly sexual character. Then some years later, my sister was 11, which would make me 20, and I looked at her and her peers and I was like, well, shit, I made a grave miscalculation. Those are little kids. So obviously not a romance I'd recreate today. I fucked up. I was a kid and I fucked up. I apologize. Won't do it again, obviously. So, yeah, here's my long-awaited explanation there. Chapter 6, they get to the secluded Italian countryside and enter the ICBG's base. Nudge claims that the wardrobe alone is a mile square. That's absurd. I hope she wasn't being literal. Even assuming you have any money or resources, which I don't think the ICBG do, building a building takes a lot of time. It seems like this base was erected secretly in the space of a week. That's dumb. Man, I really never thought about setting when I was younger. So Fang looks over a photo of the original 7 members of the ICBG when they were human, and Danny, now an octopus guy, comes and speaks to Fang, explaining that the photo was taken 8 years ago, only a few months before they went on the run. They were on the run for a long time before the flock came out in public, and the ICBG decided that they had the right to go public too. Danny discusses how Laura was once his best friend, but she had turned evil long before Max killed her, but not as evil as Jewel. Fang recalls an event from the actual books, the ITEX Corporation and their buy half plan. If I recall the book correctly, that plan's name wasn't entirely literal. They weren't going to reduce the human population of Earth by half, but they were going to reduce it by a significant number for the good of the planet. I guess Maximum Ride had that evil plan many years before Thanos came along and made it cool. And, Thanos especially made it cool by, not failing, According to Danny, Jewel's plans for the human population make the buy half plan look harmless and sensible, so they prepare to thwart it. Chapter 7. After 5 consecutive chapters from Fang's perspective, we move over to a third-person chapter that shows Jewel and Bridget. Jewel is fiddling around with the display and telling Bridget about his current plan to perfectly outline a single country's borders in fire, then disintegrate everything within, proving they mean business. But which country to start with? France? Egypt? China? I mentioned those specific 3 countries because they were the vacation destinations in the latest expansion pack for The Sims 3 at the time, and it made for a nice escalation, France, Egypt, China. Bridget asks why he wants to blow up an entire country, and Jewel explains that there's so much division and conflict among humanity, and he wants to put a stop to that, to make all humans equal while he alone is above them. And to make that easier on himself, he's going to reduce the population of the world to 100. 100 humans left on Earth. He is working on picking out the 100 best ones before he gets to work, and that's why he has no interest in our heroes. Not human enough. Have to kill him. He promises he'll hang on to Bridget, let her live, and that's the only part she cares about. Chapter 8, Iggy point of view. A week has passed, and he's noticed that Fang hasn't slept in that time. He encourages Fang to talk about how he feels about Max's departure. Fang admits that the only person he could talk to was Max, and Iggy assures him that the other 4 members of the flock are perfectly capable of emotionally supporting him. Fang accepts this, and Iggy returns to bed. And that's the halfway point of this story. Podcast conclusion? I got nothing. Been here long enough as it is. I'll see you next time.